Hello everyone and welcome to our live stream, and thank you for your support. Thank you for your questions and comments piling up as I speak in the chat room. So if you'd like to talk about anything, well, motor racing related, join the chat room and we'll try and deal with it. 2 hours of sparkling conversation and fun, I hope. Well, I'm sure it will be, as ever. It's been a while, hasn't it? Seems longer than it is, really. It's 3 weeks. I mean, it's nothing really, but it seems a long time in a season as intense as the current Formula One season. Ridiculously intense, if you like. A 3-week break is a massive break. So a lot of the teams, a lot of the drivers issuing statements going into Baku saying, "Oh, it's been a great time to get back into the gym and do this and do that, get prepared. I'm fully ready to go." Yeah, let's see what it all looks like at the end of the weekend. A lot to talk about because it's a sprint weekend in Baku. I'm just going to go back to my other page now. It's a sprint weekend in Baku and it's a new sprint format. That was only decided a couple of days ago. There were 2 or 3 options on the table at the FIA commission meeting and they opted for this one. It was all to try and spruce it up. Don't talk to me about how to spruce up sprint racing because I think Formula One was just fine as it was. But anyway, we got sprint racing. I'm not going to decry it because that would just be pointless, wouldn't it? It is what it is, as Michael Schumacher used to say. So we got to get on with it. And this one is quite an interesting one because it's FP1 as normal on a Friday, and then you go straight into qualifying for the Grand Prix proper in what used to be effectively FP2, that time slot. So that's a full qualifying session for the Grand Prix on Friday. And what does that mean? That means, of course, that the cars are in Parc Fermé at the end of FP1. And that is, that's quite difficult, isn't it? Particularly on a circuit like Baku. And we're going to talk about that coming up with all the upgrades that the teams have had time to prepare, you would say, to digest what's happened in the first 3 races. This is a good moment to bring in the upgrades. But guess what? It's a sprint weekend, 1, and 2, it's not really the sort of circuit where you really want to bring a lot of upgrades anyway, because you've only got to touch a wall, a floor, front wing. It's very easy to damage stuff around Baku. So it's not an ideal place to be bringing upgrades. So a lot of the teams, I think, are bringing some parts, new floors, bit of this, bit of that, but it's going to be a stage introduction in terms of upgrades. And we can talk about this. I'm sure a lot of you have got opinions, and we can talk about what we think about the sprint race format in general and this one in particular. But I'll just to go through the rest of the weekend. And then on Saturday morning, there's basically qualifying for the sprint race on Saturday afternoon. So the whole of Saturday is sprint orientated, self-contained, and the qualifying for the sprint is totally unrelated to anything that might have happened on Friday. And the finishing order, more importantly, of the sprint, totally unrelated to how they will start in the Grand Prix on Sunday. Now that's in itself a big change because the incentive before in the sprint race, apart from points, but let's look at it from the standpoint of a Max Verstappen or a Sergio Perez or a Charles Leclerc. Well, not Charles Leclerc because he's got many points, but okay, Lewis Hamilton. He's got a few points now, hasn't he? Look, from their standpoint, the incentive was, I need a good grid position for the Grand Prix, obviously, stay out of trouble. And that was what the sprint was all about. That has gone away now. And so that incentive has gone away. The only incentive actually now are the points. And the points are somewhat smaller relative to the points that can be scored in a Grand Prix. 8 for a win. I think it's 8 for a win, yeah. And 8 down to 8th place. 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so you then wonder, well, what is the incentive? Well, the incentive now, of course, is the back of the grid because they've got absolutely nothing to lose. And there's some points there to be taken, which they perhaps might never have seen before. So I think it's going to change things around. And if you're a Max Verstappen, and let's say you've got the pole for the Grand Prix on Sunday, and you got that on Friday, and you don't have a great morning qualifying for the sprint race, what are you going to do? You're going to take a lot of risk in that race just to get 4 points instead of 3? Or you're going to back away from the traffic and just keep the car in one piece? Thank you very much. That's what could be happening at the front of the grid. I think at the back of the grid, it'll be a different story. I think there's more opportunity now than ever to be really aggressive and nothing to lose, if you like. So it's a bit of a change, that. And again, it's all a bit confusing, really, isn't it? And you wonder, well, I wonder about the whole sprint thing, and whether or not we're fixing something that didn't need to be fixed in the first place. I thought qualifying was pretty good on a Saturday, and I really enjoyed Fridays as well. But anyway, that was just me. And then just to finish that point, they then go into the race normal on Sunday. It's just the Grand Prix on Sunday. You'll be relieved to hear. But of course, that means that the cars are in Parc Fermé. You can't touch the car in terms of setup after FP1 on Friday morning for the race on Sunday. Now, we saw how that caught out Red Bull in Brazil last year. They didn't get the ride heights right in FP1, and they had to live with that for the rest of the weekend. And that is, that is a problem. And that could well happen around Baku. So the next thing is, what are they going to do in terms of how they approach this weekend? Because you've got just the Friday morning session and then qualifying for the Grand Prix. And on top of that, you've got upgrades to test. How many are going to go out there and test upgrades? I think if you are Red Bull and you've got quite a lot to lose in effect, why would you play around with the car too much if you've only got one session and all you want to do is get the front row of the grid sorted, and you want to get the car handling well, you want to get the ride heights correct, and you want to get Max and Sergio comfortable with the car and able to get out there and do their time? You wouldn't do that much to the car, I don't think, in this situation. But if everybody else, of course, has got nothing to lose, and if you're Mercedes, Ferrari, you might as well just throw the dice and see whether or not some big change is going to have an effect, and hope that that isn't going to affect too much the way you go into qualifying. One other thing I should say is that qualifying for the sprint race is only 45 minutes rather than an hour, and they only have one set of tyres for each of the three segments, and it's a medium for the first two and a soft for the third, which is quite good, I guess. I think it's good. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I'm a bit confused. I've been watching Formula One for quite a long time, and I'm having difficulty picturing exactly how it's all going to pan out and how it would be. Well, I think we'll see after FP1. FP1's quite an important session, isn't it? Really important session on the Friday. Anyway, that's that. And then there's other bits of news as well, which I should give you. And if you haven't heard, Franz Tost is leaving. He's staying in a consultancy role from 24 onwards, but he's leaving his role as team principal of AlphaTauri at the end of this season. He's had a really good innings, Franz, and he's done a great job really for that satellite Red Bull team over the years, I think. He's done a great job in motor racing in general. Don't forget, he worked with Willy Weber when a very successful Formula 3 team, went to Williams under the BMW banner. He was working for BMW at that point. And AlphaTauri's done a really good job with Red Bull. A tough, hard, guy, but knows he's racing. Good man, I think. Very good man. And I don't know, they're replacing him with two people, it seems, as Peter Bayer is going to be CEO of AlphaTauri from 24 onwards. And from Ferrari, they're taking the current sporting director and assistant team principal, Laurent Mekies, which is an interesting one, isn't it? This is the era now of Freddie Vasseur, and Laurent Mekies is leaving. I think that's more important than the reality of going to AlphaTauri. And I think that possibly is the first big thing we've seen from Freddie Vasseur. He strikes me as being a guy who's not really into middle management stuff, and he wants to get on with it. And although he's team principal, but he can do a lot. Does he need an assistant team principal is what I'm really saying, I suppose. And does he need a sporting director for that matter? He's probably all of those things, and he has been over the years. Anyway, be interested to see what they do there. And it'll be interesting, and when we'll talk about that, please, comments. And I think also it'll be interesting to see what they do technically at Ferrari, because they seem to be going round and round in circles a little bit. It'll be interesting to see. I keep using the word interesting, but it will be fascinating to see what they bring to Baku and how different the car may or may not be from Melbourne, and where they're going technically with that car. I was talking to Scarbs about this just before we went live, and he was saying, it's difficult to see Ferrari going forward at the moment. I hope that's not the case, for all the Ferrari fans out there. And I think most of us should be Ferrari fans, even if we're not, if you see what I mean, because they're really good for Formula One. And but how are they going to be Red Bull beaters in the next couple of races? They're not really. It's going to be really different. Having said all that, this is a sort of chaotic, frenetic weekend, sprint weekend on a circuit, a 6-kilometer circuit with, I don't know how many, 20 corners or something, 2 DRS zones, unbelievable speed differential because they're very, very high speed straights, long straights. it's sort of weekend where anything can happen, and Ferrari could easily emerge winners of a Grand Prix weekend like that, providing they run the team well and providing, things kind of go their way. And Freddie Vasseur, this will be a first real test, I think, of Freddie Vasseur's leadership of Ferrari, because there's a real chance for them to do half reasonably. But out there, who have they got technically? I mean, it'd be interesting if they do anything with James Key. That's one thing they might do, I suppose. Simone Resta, another guy they might get. But at the moment, interesting to see what Ferrari do. Anyway, and one other bit of news, actually, before we start, because I'm going to mention it now, because I don't want it to get, sunk in the back end of the show or even forgotten. And that is the passing of Ken McAlpine, who lived to the ripe old age of 102. Not many Formula One drivers from the 50s lived to be 102, that's for sure. It was an unbelievably dangerous time of Formula One's history. But he did race, and he was an incredibly successful businessman, initially in the car business, later on in property development, helicopters and all sorts of things. And started Continental Automobiles in Surrey, shortened the word to Connaught, and that was Connaught. It was all Ken McAlpine's baby, with Rodney Clark and Mike Oliver, his two men, and he financed and made it all happen. He made that 1955 Connaught Grand Prix win at Syracuse happen with Tony Brooks driving, and that triggered the whole British motorsport Formula One revolution, really. After that, Van Wall, BRM, Lotus, they all fell into place, and it was because of that Connaught win that was heard around the world, absolutely heard around the world, and like the rifle shot that started World War One. No, it was a big, big win, and that was all Ken McAlpine. And bless him, lived to be 102, so he's just passed away. So I'd like to mention him at the outset because, top Formula One man for sure, racer, true racer. Anyway, let's get down to it and have a look at your comments. Just Drive is the name. Just Drive, yeah, fair enough. Do you think George Russell will outperform Lewis again this season? And what will that do to the mental state of Lewis? I'm not sure what Lewis would think if he saw that question. Outperform, he'll say, well, he had a few breaks, didn't he? George was really good, wasn't he, in his first year, and he's been really good this year. And I don't see any way George won't be as quick and as effective as he was last year. He's that sort of guy, and very, very fast racing driver. I think Lewis still has that incredible feel for the car when the variables come into play, and it's not just one quick lap on a new set of softs. It's more than that. It's managing the car in crosswinds, of which I've got to tell you, if you go to the FerrariF1.com site, which is open to everyone, not just media, it's the whole thing. Charles Leclerc's done quite a good little video in the build-up to Baku. It's ostensibly sitting in a simulator of the lap of Baku. They don't show the whole lap, but he makes an interesting point on the last corner, saying there's quite a lot of crosswind there. And he says, as he's going on the sim, he says, there's crosswind here, and usually the car understeers a lot here. And it's like, and he deals with it. He deals with that understeer for sure. And that's where Carlos Sainz is thinking, how do I deal with the understeer? Change the front bar, do this, do that. And there's Charles, a bit of understeer should make the car interesting. It's a nice little moment. I don't think Ferrari were aware of how nice a moment that was, as Charles describes that on that last corner. Anyway, Ferrari, I think it's FerrariF1.com or Ferrari.com F1, whatever, something like that. So many Ferrari websites, it's kind of difficult to keep up with what they're doing, isn't it? But going back, I think Lewis is, as I said before, I'm absolutely astounded how well Lewis is driving, considering he's a 7 times world champion and he's been in Formula One since 2007. It's a long time, and he hasn't lost any of his motivation, hasn't lost any of his desire to get out there and race it with these young guns and take it to them and do a really good job. And he hasn't had much practice at that because he's always been in pretty good cars. And here he is, being Lewis Hamilton, driving beautifully. So I think, he's ahead on points at the moment, isn't it? Very early on, obviously, and George is due for a good result. But Lewis, I think, will feel pretty good about what happened in Melbourne. And interesting, I'm going to stop saying that word. It'll be interesting. It'll be fascinating to see how he goes in Baku now, I think. Because it is, especially under the sort of pressure they're going to be under going into qualifying, where the cars will be even more of a compromised setup than they would normally be due to the lack of running, and probably they're going to have to devote at least 10-15 minutes to doing some sort of testing of new parts in FP1 and going straight into qualifying. And in those situations when the car's got a bit of a glitch, Lewis will be really good, in my opinion. So yeah, let's wait and see on that one. The jury's out, obviously, as to where Mercedes might be, but it looks as if, despite all the bluster with I was mainly Toto and Lewis, I guess, maybe being misquoted, I don't know. There was a lot of sort of quotes out there that they were going to have to go to the zero pod, get rid of the zero pod and go the Red Bull route. Well, they seem to be reading between the lines of what they're saying now. They seem to be saying, well, we're going to continue with this car. It ain't half bad, is it? And we continue to improve it and do what we do well. And, maybe they'll be focusing even more on wind tunnel CFD correlation and racetrack correlation. And we'll see where they go with that. But, whether or not Mercedes, how quick they'll be, is again, their big chance this weekend is if they're really good in a scrappy situation and come out of it well from various, incidents that are bound to occur. I'm slightly sweaty palmed, I got to say, about Baku, because I hate speed differential. I just have this thing about speed differential. And there's enough of it without DRS. And to have those two DRS zones, particularly the first one on that massively long straight, is, I just hope that there's nothing bad happening this weekend, because it is a huge, huge differential you can get with DRS in the right sort of tow. Massive. Rayo, Williams could have signed Lewis Hamilton in 2004, but their former engine partners, BMW, passed up the opportunity. The Formula One team's co-founder, Patrick Head, said this in Autosport, February 2008. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. That was the year, I think, when Lewis was not having a great time with McLaren. He wanted to do... I'm not 100% convinced that I'm right here, but it hadn't gone that well in Formula 3, and I think they wanted to switch teams, or they didn't want to switch teams, and Martin Whitmarsh was actually quite helpful he was quite sympathetic to Lewis and Anthony Hamilton, and Ron wanted to go in another direction. I think there was a bit of argy-bargy going on there, and at that time, I would be completely shocked if Ron would have allowed anybody to have signed Lewis, because for sure he had him on a long-term contract. But I suppose there might have been enough aggro going on behind the scenes for some sort of deal to be done. Probably would have cost BMW quite a lot of money. But here's a thought. Because Lewis wasn't a Formula BMW Academy, if that's the right word, driver, maybe that's why BMW didn't do it. I mean, Williams... historically have always been a little bit, well, in my experience with Frank, he never wanted to take the plunge with young drivers ever. I took Mark Webber to Frank when Mark was in Formula Ford, and Frank did nothing about it. And of course he ran Senna in the 08C in 83 at Donington, as did a couple of other teams also run that. But he didn't do anything with that and there. But he didn't do anything with that and then because he had contracts with Jacques Lafitte and Keke Rosberg, and there was no way of... He didn't want to break those contracts, and there was no way, therefore, of racing Ayrton in 84, and Ayrton wanted to race. That's why he went to Tolman in the end. So, but, you could argue Frank was looking quite good. He had the Honda deal lined up, and maybe he could have put Ayrton on a long-term contract before he let him test the car, and Ayrton always loved Frank and might have signed that, but Frank didn't do that either. So Williams' history of not doing deals with young drivers is pretty powerful history, and some of it was that as well, I think. Hidi Zutphen says, "Hey Peter, love your detailed analysis." Well, thank you very much, Hidi. I feel like you've not reflected enough on the amazing season that was 2021, even though Abu Dhabi was not right. Luck was evenly balanced over the season, with Baku, Silverstone and Hungary as bad luck moments for Max. It was the closest championship fight in years. Yeah, it's just, I suppose, because it's got recent history, I'm just not banging on about 2021 again. I mean, my thoughts are everybody knows my thoughts, I think, on Abu Dhabi and the scandal of Abu Dhabi and the ridiculous decision that was taken, and how I think Mercedes should have fought harder to get that result changed. and gave up, partly because they're a big corporate operation and, they didn't want to rock the boat too much. But I think I just can't imagine anything. Like, I couldn't imagine anything like that would ever happen, I suppose. So I'm still kind of not in awe, I'm just sort of completely numb about 2021, the end of 21. The rest of it, yeah. But don't forget, I'm not a guy who is absolutely fanatical about close racing and close championship finishes and points. And I'm a Jim Clark guy. I love pure driving skill. And if the guy wins by a lap, so be it. Doesn't worry me at all. I don't go around counting the number of overtakes after a race. I'm not interested in that. I'm much more interested in how teammates compare on the ultimate performance of one team against another and why things happen. For me, that's the fascination of Formula One. And I've always said, there are certainly other forms of motorsport you can go to if you want lots of overtaking, incredible excitement. Yes, 2021 also had that in Formula One. You could say it's some sort of bonus, but I enjoyed the other years just as much, actually. And people say, "Oh, the boring Lewis Hamilton years," but I love them. I love seeing good racing drivers do what they do well. I love seeing Max when he got into Red Bull, showing everybody his class, even when he wasn't winning races. That was to me just as enjoyable as watching him in 2021. But that's just me. I'm a bit odd like that. So you guys need to make allowances for it. I'm not going to change now, I don't think, after all these years. So there we are. SBAK 4444 says, more notice, please, sir. What does that mean? I think when I go live with the intention to do the live stream on YouTube, this one went out 2 days ago. And people don't want too much notice, do they? They're going to get sick of it all, a bit bored with it all. But maybe I should be doing a bit more on Twitter about it. But I don't know. I'm slightly ambivalent about Twitter at the moment. I don't know what to think about it. Sean Hines, what do you think Mercedes' chance of getting it right during the 23 season? And if so, do you think Lewis will be able to get at least one win? I think Lewis will win a race this year. I mean, it's incredible when you think he didn't win a race last year, and George did. But it's kind of, the way of things, isn't it? I think he will win a race, and I think it could well be this sort of weekend, sprint weekend, bit scrappy, nobody gets the setup quite right, lots of compromises involved. You've really got to deal with all the variables and keep the balls in the air, and Lewis may get a result this weekend. And I suppose we got to say Mercedes will get better. I hope they will. Toto's saying, we made solid progress. Well, that was Toto, actually. It was Andrew Shovling. Solid progress in Melbourne. Well, that's good. Red Bull haven't yet done any development on their car yet. So the only thing that matters is whether or not they can be up there with Red Bull, really, because we know they're going to be the next best team, kind of. And are they going to close that gap? That's the question. And it's difficult to see how they're going to do it myself. Because I think Red Bull have got, even though they've still got the restraints of their penalty and the logical ongoing constraints anyway of budget cap and testing and everything, and the penalty, as I say, they've got a great car and they haven't even sort of opened the box of bits yet that they can put on it in the upcoming races. It's a bit of a worry for everybody else, isn't it? Stefan Champoussin. Hope I pronounced that correct, Stefan. Hi, Peter. Great to have your quality analysis of our Formula One questions. How would you compare Ayrton and Alan driving skills in 80s, 90s? Alan Prost versus Ayrton Senna. I did actually go on quite a lot about this, didn't I, in the last live stream? I think Ayrton was all a bit like George, maybe against Lewis. Now, I think, one set of tyres, one lap, most circuits. I think Ayrton was always going to do Alain, but not by much. Not as much as Nigel did Alain in qualifying for the 1990 British Grand Prix. Interesting point. But go back to Ayrton. Ayrton was absolutely stretched the limit of the car in every dimension. He didn't overstretch it, but he stretched it. And he used, if Prost was 2 centimetres margin, Ayrton would be 3/4 of a centimetre margin. And I think Prost had shorter corners. He definitely went in earlier, and he definitely had more feel for shortening the corner and managing the dynamic weight of the car at that moment of the corner. Ayrton was all about on the absolute limit of braking as late as he could possibly brake without locking up and doing anything, unless he was doing it intentionally, as in Japan. But forget those moments. Ayrton was not a guy that you saw with the inside front locked up very much. His feel for the brake pedal was unbelievable. And his synchronization of downshifts was the best at that time, I think. I say I think because I don't ever think Nigel was bad in downshifting either, on mechanical downshifts. And still the best upshifter I ever heard was Michele Alboreto, actually. But anyway, getting back to Ayrton, he was incredibly good under braking and downshifting and getting the car in the right position. Then he had this weird thing of blipping the throttle, which Alain didn't do. So that was the major style differential, if you like, that Ayrton's natural feel for the car was to feel the back end and to be waiting for the precise moment when he could load up the loaded rear. And he would do that by just not jabbing the throttle, but by moving the throttle quite a lot, much more than a normal driver would. And that wasn't really a problem when it came to turbo engines, because that's what a lot of drivers had to start doing with turbo lag to get through the throttle lag situation. But he did it on normally aspirated engines as well. And there I think it was a bit of a problem. And I think there Prost probably had an advantage with when it came to tire management, as a result of Prost's silky smooth ability to put the throttle in at the right rate. And on top of that, if you want to talk about track craft, I mean, Prost was the ultimate Niki Lauda clone of not getting in any position where somebody could hit him or take him out of a race. He was really good at protecting his car. And Ayrton was the opposite. If Ayrton saw a gap, he went for it. And he was never, ever of the belief that anybody was quicker than he was, or could brake later than he could, or could get the power on sooner than he could, or could leave a finer margin than he could. He just absolutely convinced that he was the best in all those areas, and the best in the wet too. And he used to try to get a few more revs out of the Honda engine than Prost by talking to the Honda engineers, just seeing how far he could stretch it in every year, what effect it might have if he ran 30 more revs than Prost was at that given moment. And if he could do it and get away with it, he would. And so, yeah, he was just this ultimate thing. I mean, Ayrton, I used to love watching Ayrton, even in the Formula 3 days, Formula Ford days, actually, and his detail at racetracks and the way he packed his race bag, for example, very, very neat and tidy, everything in its place, everything just there to be as easy as possible to use and to get to and to manipulate. And then he'd spend time watching the start procedure of the other races that weekend just to get a feel for how the starter was going to be working the lights. And he would walk the track sometimes on his own, in his own thoughts. He didn't need people around him to discuss it with. And he would always be thinking outside the box. You know, that famous moment at Thruxton in the final of the Formula 3 Championship when he had a blocked side radiator and he just undid the belts and got the thing out of the radiator and kept racing and won the race, won the championship. But a tough guy, you know, really tough guy, Ayrton, in terms of he was never going to give way. And when he and Nigel were alongside one another, you know, it was like two battering rams. But Prost would give way to Ayrton for sure. Different approach to life. But got to come, you know, I've got a massive amount of time for Alain Prost. I think he's very underrated for a guy that won 4 world championships and who was as resilient as he was against Ayrton Senna. Very impressive. Very impressive. So there we are. Hope that gives you some idea. Lewis Thomas, best channel in Formula One. Thank you very much, Lewis. It's very kind of you to say so. For those of you that think that I've got backhanders going on with all these, Not at all. I'm just completely overwhelmed. People are so nice. Sooner or later, somebody's going to say, Peter, get off air. What a load of old rubbish. I'm not going to give any ideas to anyone. Please don't. I'm sensitive, lad. Bramwell, a little off topic. What was Bruce McLaren's attitude of response to the Ken Miles Le Mans finish debacle? Well, yeah, so you're probably asking that because you've probably seen the movie. I haven't seen the movie, but I did talk to Chris Amon a lot about that. And of course, he drove with Bruce and they won that race together. And they were not very unhappy about it because Ken Miles had been quite difficult that weekend and had speeded up towards the end of the race against the agreed team orders, to the point where Bruce and Chris were starting to have to punish their car more than they wanted to. So they didn't feel in any way regretful about that. And I think I didn't know Ken Miles, but oddly he came out to Australia. I think it was 66. He just did a one-off race at Lakeside in Queensland in a Cobra. And there's great pictures of him sideways everywhere in this Cobra. He didn't come to Warwick Farm, didn't go to Sandown as far as I can remember. He just did that one race. I always thought that's the most bizarre thing. Anyway, that was just it just happened. Ken Miles, mega. I mean, he was really good, Ken, wasn't he? A fabulous engineer driver. But the real story of that Le Mans 66, I don't know whether they ever showed this in the movie, but to me, the big story of that race weekend was Chris and Bruce on the podium after the race with Henry Ford. And Henry Ford sort of got them both like this, and we've won, Ford have won. And he sort of says, you two guys are going to be heroes. I'm going to take you back to the States. We're going to do a world tour of the American market, and this is going to be brilliant. I'll tell you what, Mustang each for you. That's out of the box straight away, but and more. So Bruce and Chris looked at one another and sort of did one of these. And so they went off and they did this tour of the United States, and they were staying in motels most of the time, at Howard Johnson's and stuff, and doing these things for Ford. At one point, Chris was saying, this is a bit boring, Bruce, isn't it, doing all this stuff? When are we going to get back to reality? And Bruce was saying, yeah, but we're getting the Mustangs anyway, so that's a cool thing. The 66 Mustang is a pretty nice road car. Guess what? They never got the Mustangs. And to this day, I think that's, a black mark for Ford. And Chris was always Chris was a sweet guy and never complained about it really. But there was a moment towards the end of Chris's life when I guess it was 2016. It was the anniversary of the win. And I actually rang Ford, the only person I knew at Ford in the PR department, and said, look, told them that story. And I said, wouldn't it be a really cool thing to get Chris over to Le Mans and present him with a Mustang after all these years? What a great promotion for Ford. And he said, oh yeah, great idea. Nothing ever happened. So there you go. I know Ford are coming into Formula One, and I've got a lot of time for Ford and the history in motorsport. Ford, The Dust and the Glory, Leo Levine, one of the great motor racing books, and for everything they've done. And my motor racing career actually began at the Ford Motorsport, sorry, I just nudged the camera, Ford Motorsport press conference at the end of the 71 season. I was going to have a drink of water. Excuse me. And so I've got, I owe Ford a lot. Ford Cosworth, Ford this, Ford that, Ford Lotus Cortinas, Ford Lotus Elan engines. Love it. But that always saddened me to hear that story about the Mustangs. And I wish they had got the Mustang. The other thing about the Mustang, 65, Jim Clark won the Indy 500, as probably everybody knows. And the pace car that year, I think, was a Thunderbird. And the winner always got the pace car, was part of the prize. And Jim, after the race, actually said, no, I don't want the Thunderbird, I want a Mustang. And so Ford said, yeah, okay, we'll give you a Mustang, a convertible Mustang. And guess what? That Mustang for Jim Clark was, whilst it was being unloaded at the docks in the UK a few months later, something broke and it just crashed to the ground. It was completely smashed. And he never got that Mustang either. So there's your Christmas quiz question. What have Chris Amon and Jim Clark got in common? Neither of them got Mustangs. And you could add Bruce to that, actually. And then Jim got a Fairlane, didn't he, instead? And he drove that around a lot. Coupe, big Ford Fairlane and automatic thing that he loved. It was he was a big slushmobile driving it around the UK, and I think he drove it to Europe a few times as well. 66. Massive great thing at the time. Probably quite a small car by today's standards. There you go. That was it. Thank you, Bramwell. Talk about going off on tangents. Eric Tass, Peter, are you at the very least aware of the bias you have for UK drivers and the UK vibe of Formula One yourself and many others are trying to safeguard? I'm not actually, no. I was talking about this yesterday. I did an interview with a very nice girl from a Spanish YouTube, I think it's a YouTube channel. Don't think it's out yet. And I was saying, nationalism and the nationality of drivers has never been an issue for me at all. I mean, yeah, Nigel Mansell happened to be English, but he was English. But one of my closest friends and one of the drivers I rated highest was Carlos Reutemann, who was Argentine. And I was a huge Pedro Rodriguez fan. He was Mexican. And I'm a big Max Verstappen fan, and he's Dutch. So I don't know what you're on about, really. And I've never, ever been biased towards UK drivers. As a matter of fact, I was raised in Australia, so if I was going to be biased anywhere, and I've got Australia in my blood, I mean, if I watch cricket, I'll always support the Australian cricket team. So, I'll always be interested in Aussies. So if I was going to be biased, which I don't think I am, it would probably be towards Australians, not UK. So I'm not quite sure, Eric Tass, what you're on about, but thank you very much indeed for your question. Abhishek Ranjan, Red Bull benefited highly from the cost cap breach and also won the title in 2021. Well, yeah, you can say that. I don't know. I think they just had a really good car, and I don't think that car was that good because of the overspends they had, which were not massive in the overall picture of aerodynamic development and where they were going with the car. I mean, if what you say is correct, then why did none of the other teams have a car anything like as good, even though they were spending fortunes as well? I mean, the amount of money extra that Red Bull spent didn't make any difference. It was the concept, and it's the aero efficiency of the car. So I actually don't agree with you there, but thank you again for making that point. Diego Marino, hi Diego, good man. Truth of the matter is that Checo will win 3 to 4 races this year, more races, and Max should win the rest of the other 19, 20 Grand Prix. That's quite something, because Diego, speaking of nationalism, I know is Mexican. So there you go. He reckons Checo will win 3 to 4. I think he could well be right. That's about the right balance when you've got a team like Max Verstappen and a really good wingman like Sergio Perez. By the law of averages, he's going to win 3 to 4 races. Sergio, that is. Assuming he doesn't keep moaning about the car. And I was interested to see, actually, and I think I'd better read this, that in his pre-Baku quotes, they never really say very much in these things, but if you read between the lines on this one, I'm amazed that he's still going on about this. He's still going on about the fact that they didn't touch the car between qualifying and the race. The race is in the dry and he had no braking problems. And in the semi-wet, he kept locking up. And he keeps saying, you must take advantage of these moments away from the track, especially when you see how the busy period is coming up on us. Australia wasn't perfect for us. Having the car and performance consistent is my aim this season. It's odd, he's got a comma after us there. I think he meant to put a semicolon because there's 2 independent clauses there separated by a comma. So it's a bit difficult to know exactly how to phrase and parse the sentence there. But I'll read it again with what I think should have been the semicolon. Australia wasn't perfect for us, semicolon. Having the car and performance consistent is my aim this season. And it wasn't last season. For 2 races, we had that. And now as a team, we must make sure that's the standard we keep for the remaining races of the season. In other words, we didn't have that. It was the car in Melbourne. I'm amazed Red Bull. I'm still letting him say that on the base because it wasn't the car. Anyway, that was interesting that they said, full marks to Red Bull for being a bit controversial, I guess, what you can say. BJ. Peter, as you know Nigel Mansell very well, who will be the lion this upcoming weekend? Who will drive a Nigel Mansell type race? Is that what you're saying, BJ? I think it probably is. Well, I think, I think George is probably pretty capable of doing a sort of Nigel Mansell-esque performance this weekend, isn't he? Sort of thing where George could sort of hit a few things, but he could come through it all, and when all the dust settles, he might be there. So yeah, George, I would say, would be one. I'd love to say Lewis, but I just don't know how Lewis thinks about all this with the sprint race and all that. He probably thinks, well, it gives us more of a chance with a car that isn't a Red Bull beater. We've got an opportunity to do something if we're really imaginative, I suppose is the right word. But, Max is a racer, isn't he? Is Max not going to do a Nigel Mansell performance this weekend? Of course he is. The only thing that could go wrong for Max will be if Red Bull have the sort of FP1 they had in Brazil and they get everything completely wrong. And I think they would have learnt from Brazil. I think they would. And so what else could go wrong for Max? I suppose he could biff it in the first session and he would qualify last or something. But, difficult to see Max doing that. This is the team that's going to have the least upgrades, I would have thought, because they don't need to, and they can just focus on, in this sprint weekend, just getting the car right for qualifying on Friday, and then doing the best job they can on Saturday, which will obviously mean getting on the front row away from all the trouble in the sprint race on Saturday, and then winning the Grand Prix on Sunday. I mean, that's what he'll try and do, I suspect. But, well, not suspect. For sure, that's what they'll try and do. Baron Kigumi says, Mr. Windsor is back and everybody's happy. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Franz Tost is set to leave AlphaTauri, and Laura Mecki's the new team principal. Huge shake-up at Faenza. Commitment from Red Bull Group to bring AlphaTauri up. Yeah, I think that's a very good point you make, and it was the other point I should have made at the outset. And that is, for a B team, this is quite a vote of confidence by Red Bull, isn't it? To say, well, we're going to put some highly rated people in and we're going to continue with this team and we're going to go for it. I do still think that Red Bull would sell AlphaTauri at any given moment if somebody offered them the right money. And I think that's been the case virtually from the day they bought Minardi. The problem is, as Formula One continues to grow and as the franchise team system continues to be a bigger and bigger business, there's less... Well, rather, there are virtually no takers out there to buy a team like AlphaTauri because it requires so much money now that anybody like Michael Andretti and his group would think, we don't need to spend all this money buying the slot. We want to create our own slot and our own team. And that's how we want to spend our money. So the odds of Red Bull ever selling AlphaTauri now are actually less than they ever were. But it is for sale for sure, I would say, for the right money. Always has been. Eric Tass, again, another Lewis Hamilton stan. If it were reversed, you would be defending Lewis Hamilton and Merck. Stop your whining. What is this? What is this all about, Eric Tass? This is a bloke going on about me being biased. It's nothing to do with Lewis's nationality, all right? I won't spell it out because I think I've enunciated it quite well. I'm talking about Lewis Hamilton, the racing driver. I'm not sure... Eric, that you know what a racing driver is, judging by the quality of your questions. Anyway, leave that. Hello from Germany, from Jesus is the Truth. Hello there. Martin Thielen. I can't join the chat, but I will listen at a later moment. Question. Well, you are joining the chat. That's great. Why is the main qualifying on Friday, whereas the majority of the people have to work? Can't change that with the other quali. Well, I think the answer to that is, you're speaking to a guy who... isn't a massive fan of the whole sprint thing anyway. The answer to that is they want to make Saturday, when people aren't working, but they're not watching Formula One as much as they do on Sunday. I think they want to have the same viewership numbers on Saturday as they get on Sunday, or try to get somewhere near it. They're trying to make Saturday this mega race sprint self-contained day of sprint qualifying and then sprint race. So Friday, they're faffing around with Friday, as you say, because most people are at work and there's not much, they can do there. So they're putting all that boring stuff on Friday, and they think all the really cool stuff on Saturday and Sunday. That's how they're seeing it at the moment. It may well not work, and I don't know how they'll judge it anyway. Probably do another survey, in which case we will have no idea where we're going. But I think that's what it's all about. They're trying to make Saturday as big as Sunday. A mistake, in my view. And I think Bernie would agree with that, because he always felt, don't take away from the big show, just less is more, and then suddenly give them the massive thing. And obviously the philosophy now is, no, it's going really well, so let's have more of it, and we'll have some on Saturday as well as Sunday. Interesting. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. That interesting word again. How quick will this is Robin Visser. How quick will the first red flag show during the sprint race? Yeah, well, he's saying that on the back of the 3 red flags we had in Melbourne, which is a lot in one race. It's not unprecedented, but a lot. And the propensity of cars to hit one another at turn 1 or turn 2 or turn 3, or all those tight corners in Baku, and the speed differential drama that I was talking about earlier. Will there be reds? Almost certainly. Yeah, I agree with you, Robin. I think there will be reds. And that's, it'll be interesting to see. I won't say it. It'll be curious to see how the FIA react to that. Well, it's the race directors anyway, because there's a bit of flack after Melbourne about the 3 flags and were they all necessary. And so in the same way that they were concerned after Saudi Arabia about discussion after the race and who really finished P3, they wanted to get that result of the penalty for Sainz cut and dried straight away, no discussion. And so maybe the red flag talk from Melbourne will bleed into Baku, and they'll resist perhaps using a red flag more than they might. Just talking about the Sainz situation, the news there is that Ferrari, as I said in the last live stream, that Ferrari made an approach to the FIA, which was bound to fail, of course, to say we think that this penalty should be revisited because under the circumstances it effectively dropped him out of the race, and it was part of a race that actually was nullified anyway, so it was ludicrous. And as predicted, it was considered not to be new evidence, and therefore nothing has changed and science is nowhere. So yeah, I keep saying as predicted as if that's a satisfactory answer. It's not. So I'm still think I think Carlos Sainz is very hard done by there, very, particularly in the context of what Lance Stroll did to Fernando Alonso in the US Grand Prix last year on the main straight, and the penalty he got. So there we go. M.A. Khan, hi Peter. The battle between Russell and Hamilton is reminiscent of Senna and Prost. Russell is quicker over a lap, but Lewis is just as strong over a race. Do you see the similarities? Yeah, well, we sort of touched on that a little bit just then. So thank you very much for that. I think Lewis is quicker than Prost, to be honest. And I saw Prost throughout his career, and I've seen Lewis throughout his career, and I think Lewis is a faster driver than Prost was at his peak. So I think that's where the difference is. But I take your point of the balance between George and Lewis and Ayrton and Prost. You could say, Jochen Rindt, Jackie Stewart, similar thing as well, I guess. But yeah, it's an interesting one. But I do think Lewis is a faster driver than Prost was. So in that sense, I don't think the comparison is absolutely spot on. Paul Phillipson, will Franz's departure from AlphaTauri and the new wind tunnel arrangements make them competitive for next year? No, I don't think Franz has been in any way a negative force at AlphaTauri. I think he's always been limited in what he could do compared with other team principals. If he had a completely free rein and wasn't working for Red Bull running their B team, which is quite a big responsibility. I think he's done that really well. I don't see him as a negative at all. I think AlphaTauri's, I said this last week, I think AlphaTauri's problem is drivers, to be honest. I think if they, if it was a free normal team and they weren't the Red Bull B team and you were choosing 2 drivers, 2 quickest guys you could get, 2 best guys you could get, I don't think you'd be going for Yuki Tsunoda and Nick de Vries. Nothing against them in terms of the job they're doing, but I think if you had 2 really quick guys in those cars, you'd see a different rate of development at AlphaTauri, a completely different approach, and a different team, different looking team. And I think Franz would have done that. He would have found 2 good guys had he not been always having to work within the Red Bull pool. or been told these are the drivers you've got to select from, as it were. So I think that's the difference. And if in the new era they decide to start going well beyond that scope and trying to get really good guys that might even give the Red Bull drivers a problem, then so much the better. But there's no sign of why they would do that. I mean, they are the B team, so they don't need to be there to be racing against the A team. That's always the issue with that team. Paul Phillipson. Oh, sorry, we did that one. Will Thomas, expecting a long rant about the pointless new sprint race format. Why can't they just scrap it entirely? Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, yeah, I've already said that. Will, thanks very much for repeating it, because I did say that. To me, I love the race weekend format. I think they got qualifying absolutely right. I think Friday's a really good day of, as I use the phrase, faffing around, but it is a bit of that, and we won't see as many upgrades in Baku because of the sprint thing, and that's a bit of a shame, I think. But it is this thing about, we got to be bigger and bigger and bigger, and if we got record crowds on Sunday, we want record crowds on Saturday. And it's more and more we're getting these press releases about the grandstands are sold out. And I think we all have to take that with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because the grandstand capacity at any Grand Prix circuit, particularly street circuits, isn't massive, apart from Indianapolis used to be, and some of the circuits with big grandstands. But most of the circuits don't have enormous grandstand capacity. All the business model of Formula One is around TV viewership. So what we really need to know is what the TV viewership is on a Saturday, Sunday, relative to free-to-air TV, pay TV in comparison. That's the real thing. And, that's another subject altogether, which then has to be mixed into the amount of money in the whole pot. So, yeah, it's a long story, isn't it? It comes back to this whole thing of, is bigger better? It should, if you've got something that works well, is the only way forward to make it bigger? I don't think it is. But I may be the only guy in the world that thinks that. You got a restaurant that goes really well. Do you want two of them? I don't think you do. Two don't usually go as well as one. But again, it's just me. And I think, as you say, there's not a lot wrong with a Grand Prix weekend. Let's just continue to do what we do really well and think about some of the other aspects of Formula One that make it so fascinating. The technology is not very visible because the teams are so secretive about what they're doing. It's very difficult for the public to look at the technology and touch and feel it. And now, if this is the next way forward of Formula One, this sort of sprint thing and having the qualifying and the sprint race on the same day, if that's the next thing, that's another thing that isn't addressing technology. In fact, it's going the other way, because it's actually, as I say, there are fewer teams going to be bringing upgrades to Baku, because FP1 isn't enough time to do an upgrade test and get the car and the driver ready for Grand Prix qualifying in FP2. It's just not enough time. Car's going to Parc Fermé straight away after FP1. So, the technology is kind of taking a back seat at the moment. And I think that's a shame, because Formula One loves to talk about how its DNA is its technology. Every team is unique. Every team has to design and build its own car. We're getting more standardized parts, and there's less emphasis on the technology over the Grand Prix weekend. And because of the budget cap, as I said in the last live stream, you're seeing, we're not able to say, we're not able to say, wow, right now Ferrari and Mercedes are building completely new cars they're going to have at the French Grand Prix. Isn't that amazing what's going on back at Bay? We can't say that because we know they're not, because they don't have the money within the budget cap to do it. And that whole technology thing is, what can I say? It's a shame that we don't have more of it. And there's so much emphasis on bigger is better. More money, bigger, gotta have it. I always smile when I get a press release from Porsche saying, I'm hoping one day I'm going to say, Porsche have decided to cut back on production and to become much more of a hand-crafted car manufacturer of the old days, and to have very limited production and to increase the quality of our cars in every dimension. But of course it never happens. They always say, Porsche they exceed the previous year's sales by another 30,000 globally, and this bigger and better. And I'm just thinking, What happened to the small handcrafted companies? I love those. But again, it's just me, folks. So I have ranted, Will. I hope I've ranted enough about sprint racing. I did say it is what it is, to quote Michael, and we should sit back and try and enjoy and make the best of it, I think, with this. I think the interesting thing will be to see how the teams approach it vis-a-vis how many upgrades they do bring and run, and how they approach the sprint race, bearing in mind the results don't count for the grid anymore. They just count for additional points. And that'll be an interesting switch of emphasis, potentially. Robin Visser says, will Ricciardo send his simulator into the rear of Verstappen? Yeah, poor old Daniel. He would have been itching to be out there in Melbourne. He'd be itching to be in this car. But you shouldn't have left Red Bull, Daniel. We all told you not to go. We told you to stick it out, that you still had some things you did really well with that race car, compared even with Max. And you could have won a lot more Grand Prix. And it was a great race team that you left as well. And you went to Renault and you went to McLaren. And now you're back there watching Checo in your car. Got a big bank account, though. So, he'll be enjoying that side of it. Peter. This is from Payne. I finally caught a live stream. How you doing, Peter? I've missed your live streams. Okay. I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah, enjoying this live stream. And hope you guys are too. I enjoy it because there's so many provocative questions. And I'm sitting in my studio and I've got lots of books here. And I look at these books sometimes, and I'm sitting at my desk, and I've got a book here called 1967, A Year of Living Dangerously, and I think, yeah, what a great book. And I flick through it and I look at Chris Amon in the Ferrari and the Surtees Honda and Jim Clark in the Lotus 49, and then I look at Mr. Le Mans, Tom Christensen's book, and think about Tom and what a wasted talent he was in some respects, because I'd love to have seen him in a proper Grand Prix car. And anyway, all I'm saying is, constantly in motor racing, you look at these things that trigger these thoughts in your mind, like those two thoughts, and like indeed your questions. And that's why I love it, because you can get stuck in a rut if you just sort of follow one aspect of motorsport. And I've never done that. I've always been doing a million different things. I love so many different aspects of motorsport. Speaking of which, I tried to watch the LMP 1, 2, whatever it is, 3 race from Barcelona at the weekend. And I must say the live stream on YouTube was pretty good, very good. And I say tried to watch, I tried to understand it, I think is more to the point. Because all I wanted to know was how Juan Pablo was going. And it was difficult to find out, where was the live timing and the scoring, and it was the team names and not the driver names. And anyway, I eventually found out. And I just thought it was kind of sad that here's a guy that was really good, not only in IndyCar, but obviously in Formula One, really quick, fabulous racing driver. And he's doing an LMP2, I guess it was, at Barcelona. And it sort of doesn't really capture anybody's interest or imagination. I know some Montoya fans out there were obviously watching it gleefully, but in terms of the overall big picture, it didn't really scratch the surface of what people were talking about. And I think that's sad, because I love seeing Grand Prix drivers in other forms of motorsport. And, when I grew up as a kid in Australia, I wasn't just fixated on Formula One. I felt it was my duty to be completely knowledgeable about Formula 2, Formula 3, sports cars, Indianapolis, and a few other things besides. And that's because, if I think about it now, that's because a lot of the Formula 1 drivers were doing all those other categories. And well, not Formula 3, obviously, but they'd come directly from Formula 3 and certainly Formula 2 and sports cars. And it's such a great thing. And it's such a shame in a way that Formula 1 is such a big thing and the rest of motorsport is such a small thing, to the point where it can really only survive if rich amateurs are, propping it up. And the teams have no chance to go out and generate proper sponsorship for their team, because they don't get any television time really, and they don't have any way of selling it to a sponsor. What's a sponsor going to buy? So it's only going to be the amateur drivers or the rich fathers in the case of Formula 3 and Formula 2. In general, obviously there are cases where very talented drivers still get through without a rich father or mother. But I think it's kind of sad, and ultimately that's the fault of the blame has to go to Bernie and Max for that, because they, over a 30-year period, they systematically just basically killed the rest of motorsport to the glorification of Formula One. And a lot of people who have made a lot of money out of Formula One and do well in Formula One would say, isn't it brilliant that they did that? Because Formula One is now huge. But I'd say, yeah, it is pretty good, but I think they went too far in a number of areas. And it's a shame now that sports car racing, Formula 2, Formula 3, isn't bigger than it is. And it should be bigger, I think. And as the final little thing about that, think about the Long Beach Grand Prix, how good that Grand Prix was for Formula One, West Coast, Los Angeles, great circuit, great time of year, incredible light, April, just a fabulous Grand Prix. And the minute Chris Pook, the race promoter, even spoke to IndyCar about also having an IndyCar race at Long Beach, Bernie, in a tantrum, pulled Formula One out of Long Beach and put Formula One's status in the United States, status pronounced in an American way, back I don't know how many years, even though it was potentially a huge market for Formula One, always had been, and tremendous heritage in the United States for Formula One in terms of Dan Gurney, Phil Hill, Mario Andretti, the US Grand Prix. And here we were in Long Beach, the perfect venue, and Bernie just took Formula One away because he was annoyed that they were doing an IndyCar race. I mean, how petty is that? And I think the Indianapolis thing ended because there was a disconnect between Tony George and Bernie over a relatively small amount of money in terms of appearance fee for Formula One at Indy. And that was a huge thing for Formula One as well, to be at Indy. Huge. It was a great race, that race. The crowds at Indy on race day were bigger than any other Grand Prix of the year. Okay, the grandstands were only 1/3 full, the big grandstands at Indy, but it's still bigger than Silverstone, still bigger than Monza in terms of the number of people sitting in the grandstands watching those Grand Prix at Indianapolis. And of course, one of the things was that Bernie and Max hung Michelin out to dry in front of the American audience, which was not a good thing for Formula One or for Michelin. Anyway, there I'm ranting about that now. So you've got plenty of rants going on. Here we are. Jacob S. says, hi Peter, curious what your thoughts are on the changes at Mercedes with James Allison and Mike Elliott switching roles. Well, I've said this before. I never really thought James Allison was completely out of the frame. And so it was a bit like, when Adrian Newey was chief designer at Williams, what was Patrick Head doing? Well, I can tell you Patrick Head was there as well, big time. And I think James was. I think, if I can't imagine that Mike Elliott went in any direction on the car that James Allison didn't approve of or know about or indeed enhance. So for me, I don't think it's a massive change. That's all I can say. I think obviously there is some sort of responsibility going on there. And maybe James was focusing on a few other things and is able to do more now on the Formula One program. But I think, if you look at Adrian isn't just doing Formula One, is he? And he's still able to focus 100% on doing the job. So, I still quote Peter Wright, who was the FIA, a brilliant aerodynamicist, still is a brilliant aerodynamicist. And he said over the winter of 2021 to 22, he sent an email to James Allison saying, good luck with the porpoising, James. And so, if Mercedes didn't know about the porpoising, they weren't reading their emails. And he sent it to James, and presumably they just did nothing with it. Prospect. Do you think Fred Vasseur is able to keep Ferrari at the highest level if they get the car right? Well, I think, I don't want to sound like Ron Dennis here saying, well, it's the wrong question. What you should have asked is, my response to that is to say, do you think Fred Vasseur is able to get the right technical team that will enable Ferrari to get the car working correctly as quickly as a Red Bull? And again, I was talking to Scarbs about this point, and there aren't that many people out there that you would say, oh yeah, this guy's an Adrian Newey, absolutely for sure, we're going to have him do the car. If I was Fred Vasseur, which I'm not, But if I was Fred, I would hire, this is completely left field, but I would hire Andy Green, because Andy's now being moved away from the Formula One project at Aston Martin. This car of his, and it is his car, is really good. And he obviously understands the use of the floor and the diffuser and the blending of the two and the aero flow in general better than most, even if the Aston isn't that quick in a straight line. And I would, if I was Fred, I'd say, Andy, name your price, come over, tell us, do it now. Probably the Strolls have got Andy pretty tied up and he isn't able to do that, but I would certainly try that. And then I would look at James Key. I would try to understand what went wrong at McLaren with James and talk to him. And what I find refreshing about James is that he is able to say, unlike the Mercedes guys, yeah, we just didn't think about porpoising and we didn't anticipate it and we should have. But he always uses the plural there, the royal we, and the implication is that it wasn't just James, it was an aero department as well there that didn't recognize it. And I like that honesty about James, and I think he's still a very, very good design engineer. And I'd be interesting to see how he went at Ferrari. And he has spent time in Italy already, knows the country, probably speaks Italian, I would guess, from his time at Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri. And I would look at him at Ferrari. But I think possibly Simona Resta, possibly. He's at Haas, I think, at the moment. Be another guy. But the key to what Freddie Vasseur needs to do is to get the right technical team at Ferrari. And short of really doing what I've said a million times and getting Adrian Newey to name his price, which will never happen. He'll never leave Red Bull to go to Ferrari, I don't believe. And anyway, Adrian's at the stage of his life where he wouldn't want that hassle anyway. I wouldn't have thought, life is too... It's not easy at Red Bull, but it's logical and uncomplicated and apolitical. So that's the environment he wants. And so that's not going to happen. So Freddie's got to look at something like the people I mentioned, I think. He may not. Having said all of that, when you look at a weekend like Baku ahead of us now, and all the dramas that could happen this weekend, the carnage, getting a car set up well, getting the best from the two drivers, going into qualifying on Friday, making sure they both got a rhythm and that they can get the time they need at the right time and to manage the GPS and the traffic and get the best from both of them. He's probably pretty good at that, and he's probably pretty good at getting ready for that very short sprint qualifying on Saturday. And I don't know about the race. How he would manage the two drivers in the sprint race depends obviously on where they qualify. But what I'm getting around to saying is he's been around long enough and he's got enough road dust and enough good racing sense, Freddie, to be able to get Ferrari focused in the right direction for a sort of cacophonous weekend like this one in Baku, unlike for sure going to be. And so it will be significant in Ferrari's year to see how Freddie handles this weekend. There you go. M.A. Khan again, I think again. Is Hulkenberg the most underrated driver? I feel he's too quick to be a number 2 driver in a leading team. He was quicker than Sainz when teammates. Is he on a similar level to a Russell? I don't think he's as quick as Russell. Why do I think that? I think Russell actually has slightly straighter lines, and I think he just has finer margins. Russell tends towards the Senna way of driving, and I think Nico is more. He's a sort of Carlos Sainz on steroids. Really good, slightly longer corners than a George, and very good. Very good at feel. He's very good at adapting to changing conditions, semi-wet, wind. He's good at all of those things. And I don't think he's just got the ultimate George Russell pace, but I hate to say it. I think he's, he would be a perfect guy at Red Bull alongside Max. He'd be a perfect guy alongside Lewis. He'd be a perfect guy alongside George, if George was number one at Merck. And he'd be a perfect guy alongside Charles Leclerc at Ferrari. Yeah, he's really good. It's ridiculous how his talent's been wasted over the years. Absolutely ridiculous. It's a bit of an indictment, really, isn't it, of Formula One, that these things, guys like Nico Hulkenberg, can be left on the sidelines. I was thinking the other day, I know I've banged on about this a while, but it's been about a year since I banged on about it. What about Artem Markelov, the Russian driver, who, I don't know how many Formula 2 races he won, but I think it was in double figures, but if not, it was somewhere near there. Never even given a Formula 1 test. He had a Renault contract. I don't think he ever sat in a car. No Formula 1 test at all. I mean, imagine in IndyCar, some guy winning 8 out of 10 races in Indy Lights or something and not being given an IndyCar test. It just wouldn't happen. And yet, Formula 1, no interest whatsoever. I mean, this was before the whole Ukraine thing, obviously. But, I mean, there's a good example of a guy who just never had a chance. David Valsecki, another, really. I think it was a third guy who's never had a Formula 2 champion, never had a win. I've forgotten his name now. I shouldn't do that. But anyway, it comes under the heading of Hulkenberg should have been in a better car for many. I mean, and don't forget, he got the pole at the Brazilian Grand Prix in a Williams, and then Williams sacked him. Tal. Is it Tal or Tal? Always love your insight, thoughts on the new sprint format. Yeah, thoughts on the new sprint format. I think it'll stop a lot of teams running as many upgrades as they would have going into Baku, because they're going to have to focus so much on qualifying on Friday, proper qualifying. And I think it'll be a different emphasis on the Saturday because there's no incentive to finish well in the sprint race in order to get the grid position for the Grand Prix. The only incentive is a cluster of points, which, it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 8, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, 8 points to Yuki Tsunoda is quite a lot. 8 points to Max Verstappen, if it means taking quite a lot of risks from the third row of a sprint race, it's not that much. It's not worth that much if he's on the pole for the Grand Prix, if you see my point. So I think that is where the emphasis is going to be very different, and we'll need to see how they do it. Fernando Alonso will be thinking, yeah, love this, one set of tyres and this thing's got Fernando written all over it, isn't it? The sprint end of it all, actually. I can see Fernando on the pole and winning the sprint race, being on the second row or something for the Grand Prix. Yeah, so that's what I think about it. I'm not a great sprint supporter, stroke fan. I don't think there was very much wrong with the Grand Prix weekend as we had it, as we've seen in the first 3 races, indeed. Sorry, I just kicked the tripod again. So, I think it ain't broke, so we didn't need to fix it. But I understand there's obviously a massive desire by the commercial rights holder to have huge TV audiences on a Saturday as well as a Sunday. And they think that having this self-contained race on a Saturday, qualifying and then the race, is the way to do that. Jim S. says, hi, Peter. I don't understand why fans want reverse order races. What incentive would a driver want to qualify first if it means starting last? Well, quite right. I mean, yeah, but again, the fans want this. Do they? I'm a fan and I don't want it. Surveys... I've always been very skeptical of surveys because they are only as good as the questions that are asked. And, if you said, would you like to have reverse order races in Formula One if it meant that all the best drivers and the best cars never won a Grand Prix? Most people would say no, wouldn't they? But if you say, would you like to have reverse grid races in Formula One to shake up the boring Formula One that we have at the moment where Lewis Hamilton wins everything? They're all going to say, yeah, bring it on. So you're right. I mean, I remember there was a weird qualifying back in the early 2000s when you didn't want to, in order to go out last, which is the quickest time to be on the track, you had to be slowest, I think. Something like that. And I remember Michael, had this down to a fine art of how slowly he had to go in order to be first, in order to be last in the real qualifying. It was ridiculous. Just get on with it. Fastest car, fastest driver, on the pole, win the race. Thank you. Not difficult. Brian Ferguson. Greetings, Peter from Canada. Hi, Brian. One of my favourite countries, as I keep saying. Main postman. Oh, and going back to that bloke who was going on about me being UK supporter, one of my closest friends in racing ever was Gilles Villeneuve, Canadian, Canadian. Sorry, it was just me going back. This bloke keeps saying that I only favour UK drivers. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. Main postman. Because of the Hulkenberg clause, he will never get a top podium. Well, Hulkenberg curse. There is a Hulkenberg curse out there. Yeah. But the nice thing, he's such a good bloke as well, isn't he? He's taken it all with a pinch of salt, and he's happy to be there, and he's, at least Haas have given him a race drive. I mean, let's hear it for Gene Haas. Great. I think it's brilliant. And, he's just as good as he was, and he kept fit all these years. Motivated. Nice man too. Yathesh in Kalapanu. I knew you'd come and ask me a question. It's difficult to pronounce your name perfectly. I'm going to have another go. Yathesh Lakalapude. That could well be your finish. I don't know. Thoughts on Max's improvements in this Formula One journey? Yeah. 22. I think he's proving... I think he's he's improved in the area of staying out of trouble. We saw that in a couple of opening laps already this year. Bahrain, good example. He just, lots of locked up fronts going into turn one, and he was just not in a position to be hit by anybody. And I think that's something that you only get over a period of time. Sounds very condescending to say that, but that's what I'm seeing in Max's driving this year. As much as he's still got everything else, I think he's got this feel for how to stay out of trouble, stay out of other people's trouble, really. I mean, that Lewis thing in Melbourne was case in point as well, wasn't it? Going into whatever it was, turn 4. And I think that's where he's worked. I think the interesting thing, sorry, I won't use that word. I think the next thing we need to see is how he'll go this weekend alongside Perez. Getting to a street circuit with quite a lot of traction episodes, although here Max is going to be so good through the quick corners, and he's going to be so good when it comes down to fine judgment under pressure, that it isn't really a test for Monaco. But it'll be fascinating when we get to Monaco to see how he compares with Perez, because Perez will for sure be super quick at Monaco because he's so good with traction and how he puts the power down and the margin he can leave. And that's one area where Max, I think, was shown up last year. And it'll be interesting to see if he's built on that and managed to improve in that area. Just as an aside, it's also interesting when you read all these press releases from the teams pre-Baku, the drivers all quoting, lots of time to go to the gym, get fit. Not one of them says, and it's given me an opportunity to work on on making my corners a bit shorter, because I was following Lewis in Melbourne, and I really noticed the difference, and no surprise because he's that good. And I've been really working on shorter corners, or in Perez's case, I've been really studying the way Max uses the brakes, and realised that I've been emphasising not braking quite as late and getting my platform a little bit more stable. You never see any of that in the press release. It's always new update on the car. We hope the team have done a great job with the car. Of course, I'm being facetious. Even if they were doing that, they wouldn't tell us, would they? But it just makes me smile, because I think most of them are not. I mean, there was a Nick de Vries thing going on about how he'd been to a football match, and then he went to a tennis match, and then he went to the gym. There was no reference of actually working on his driving compared with something he'd seen George Russell doing or something. I'd love to see, wouldn't it be great if drivers did start doing that? But they won't, will they? So that's Max. Yeah, interesting. Max's Formula One journey. He hasn't lost anything. He's just gaining and gaining and gaining. A bit like Lewis. He had a few years when he had to dig deep and start learning about new things, and did, and responded. right now. Same thing. He's having to learn about how to be a 7 times world champion who's got to beat a guy as quick as George Russell and stay out of trouble when he's not on the front row of the grid. Not easy. Jacob S. Do you think there's more to the story of Lewis not having agreed to terms with Mercedes on a contract for next year? Another car not capable of fighting for wins must surely be weighing on his mind. Well, my view is that if the Mercedes is not a great car and say Lewis doesn't win a race, maybe George doesn't win a race, and if he's got another 2 years on his contract or another 1 year on his contract, if he said to Toto Wolff, Toto, I've given you everything, I've now had 2 years of a bad car, I've got a mega offer from Ferrari and I want to take it, will you look into my eye and shake my hand and we'll call it quits? I think Toto would do that. I don't think he would say, no, you've got a contract, you must drive for us. Because I think Lewis would just say, okay, well, I'm stopping in that case. Ciao. He'd do a Mansell, I think. If it ever came down to that. I mean, the odds are that it won't, because I think he will win a Grand Prix or two this year, if not more, by the law of averages. And I think Mercedes will get better and they'll have a better car. And if nothing else, Toto will be very good at painting a picture in Lewis's mind of what it might be like in 2024 and the race-winning car they're going to have 2024. So it won't come to that. But I think if it did, I don't think contracts would be that important, actually. I think the contract's in place at the moment, basically to govern the amount of money that he's earning. Not necessarily. I mean, I can't imagine Toto really thinks I can tie this guy down. He can tie George down, or he can tie, Mick Schumacher down, but he can't tie Lewis down to that extent, in my view. Just my opinion. Just trying to think about human nature and thinking about the Toto that I know, really. Not very well, but I know enough of him to have a lot of respect for his integrity. So Lance Alex, hi Peter, have you noticed Ferrari tyre wear issues occurred after they stopped using their flexi floor plank? You mean after Spa last year? Yeah, I mean it all adds up to less downforce, and when you have less downforce, the cars, if you want to run the same top speed, it's going to use its tyres more, and therefore it comes down to tyre management, and that's what happened. It hurt Ferrari a lot, that technical directive that came into play at Spa last year, and they don't appear to have got out of that, do they? I think they probably have more tyre issues than most of their opposition at the moment. They don't seem to have changed very much in terms of the performance envelope of the car over the winter. But we'll see in Baku. Again, Ferrari, as I say, quite capable with Freddie Vasseur there, Charles Leclerc, very good, Carlos Sainz. Carlos probably still unbelievably annoyed about what happened in Melbourne and quite how he will be able to put that behind him. We'll see. But certainly Leclerc, Freddie Vasseur, good combination for Baku, for a sprint weekend in Baku. I don't think any team, even Red Bull, I don't think they'll be writing Ferrari off because of that. Because of the Leclerc, Vasseur, Jock Clear triumvirate is very powerful. And around Baku and around a sprint format, they could do really well. M.A. Khan, I saw an interview with Nigel Mansell and he was very positive about Max. He said he had a similar driving style to him. Do you see any similarities? Yeah, lots. Yeah, I think Nigel's absolutely right. Very short corners. His rate of input in terms of steering and throttle and brakes very much in harmony with the dynamic weight of the car. And I think in Max he sees a guy who simplifies his racing in the way Nigel did. I've often made that comparison. Max doesn't get carried away by all the confusion and all the data and all all the stuff that's out there. He just dilutes his day down to very simple things that he needs in order to go quickly, and he's able to tell the engineer not to worry about that little problem with the car because this is much more important, and if he can get this right, he can deal with that. That's the beauty of a Max or a Lewis or a Charles or a Nigel or an Ayrton or a Prost, and that's so. Yeah, in many ways, he's very similar to Nigel. In traffic, I don't know. Nigel was so good in traffic, and didn't really hit anybody either. But I suppose you could say Nigel. Max is probably better at staying out of trouble now than Nigel ever was at any stage of his career. But Nigel had a very different career and very different teammates as well. So I don't think it's a fair comparison. But if you wanted a comparison, I would say that Max at the moment is more able to stay out of trouble than Nigel was at his peak. Not that it was an issue in 92, because obviously he had, a brilliant car. I'm talking about 91, I guess, 89, 90, 91. Oh, from 85 onwards. So that's it. But yeah, in terms of the way they drive the race car, very, very similar. Very similar. We love techno. Hi, Peter. Glad I'm able to catch you live for once. Well, yeah, and I did have a big rant about the lack of, if you are calling yourself We Love Techno because you love the technology of Formula One, I had a bit of a rant earlier about the fact that technology doesn't get much of a hearing these days. All the talk and the way Formula One's being molded and changed and developed and progressed, it's all around sprint racing or new countries and new circuits. Very little is about technology. And I think that's a shame, because I think technology should be fascinating. And like everything else in life, it is actually about people. It's not about technology. It's about the people creating the technology. And Adrian Newey is just as fascinating as the car he built, if you like. So I would love much more emphasis on the technology. I've got ideas on how that could happen, but let's not get ahead of ourselves on that too much. So yeah, anyway, thank you very much. This Eric Tasker. I tell you what, I think I've got an option here. Where are we? Go to channel. Hide user on this channel. This is this bloke who keeps rambling on about my bias towards nationalities. Ridiculous. It's the first one I've had, which has been an annoying, what can I call it? Spam. Is that spam? Is that real spam? Delete. Anyway. Jokota Man 23, Peter, number 1, and then there's 5 more than that, exclamation marks. Thank you very much. Don't do this. It's going to annoy my wife if she sees too much of this stuff going on. Thank you. Havendra Narayansami. Sorry, I'm struggling with that. Your analysis are the best. Thank you very much. Who do you think is the best qualifier on the grid? Lewis, Russell, Leclerc, Norris? It doesn't seem to have Max in there. Right now, on his performances, you'd have to say Max. There have been a couple of occasions already. I mean, Melbourne was a very good one when he, if he wasn't on the pole, you wouldn't have been that surprised. But he got the pole, and I think that was a great lap, wasn't it? And I think Russell's possibly a slightly better qualifier than Lewis now. I think Leclerc is still a great qualifier, but what happened in Melbourne, Charles? So he needs to come back and be a different Charles. First time we've seen Charles struggling qualifying against Sainz. Amazing. Norris, what did Norris do in Saudi Arabia? Hit the apex guardrail in Q1. Oops, shouldn't be reminding Lando of that. Yeah, he did a pretty good job in Melbourne. I think the problem that Lando's got is that quick guy in the other car, which is a distraction for sure. Charles needs to... What does Charles need to do? He needs to forget about the Red Bulls and just try and beat the Mercs and enjoy his racing, because it must be so frustrating for somebody that good. Can you imagine being as good as Charles Leclerc in a racing car? And for I don't know how many years now, he's waking up knowing that the car isn't that good. It's not that good. It's not as good as a Red Bull. Probably not as good as a Merc. Not as good as an Aston Martin. It would be very, very annoying. He ought to be on the phone to Nigel Mansell, actually, Charles, and saying, I'm sorry to trouble you, Nigel. I know you're in Florida about to play the golf, but I need to ask you how you handle that first 6 years of your career when you drove very bad cars, because I'm amazed how you did that, how you kept going. Tell me. No, just put your head down, Charles. Just do it, don't give up. He isn't giving up, Charles. I mean, he's still right there. And he could have a great weekend, as I keep saying. Leclerc-Vasseur combination at Baku, sprints. Nobody's bringing mega upgrades in vast quantities because there's no time to run them. It's got a bit of Leclerc's fingerprint on it, this race. But I still think Fernando's, looking pretty good, isn't he, this weekend? Andy Middle says, reminding us, Leclerc has 2 poles in Baku. Yeah, he does. He's good. Yeah, it's a good circuit for him because it's a difficult circuit. But they were in slightly more competitive cars than the ones he has now. Music is Life. There's a great title. Hi, Peter. I feel that a sprint race on Saturday has the potential to ruin Sundays. We could see cars damaged in the sprint and not fixable by the race. What do you think of this possibility? Bring back spare cars is what I say. I was thinking, I actually was in this interview I did yesterday with this very nice Spanish journalist about when I was at Williams and I was running the race team, and I was team manager, the race team manager and test team manager. And we had 2 test cars and 3 race cars, 5 cars, big team. I still think bring back the spare cars. Then the sprint race would add up to a lot more. If they really want to make the sprint race spectacular, have a spare car available for all to be used on Sunday. Won't happen. Oh, too expensive. As if they're not spending enough already. And so that's actually, you could do it without the same expense that we used to have, because you wouldn't actually need to have a separate set of mechanics. You just have a spare car, and you've got overnight to race prepare it with your race mechanics if the other one's written off in the sprint race. So why wouldn't they do that? No, it'll be confusing when it comes to the engine usage and the gearbox usage and the parts usage and all that. Yeah, well, it would be. Yeah, there's always something, isn't there? But I take your point. I think we've seen already in the sprint races, though, haven't we seen that quite a lot of drivers get into this after you Claude mode. They just don't get involved because they've had so many team managers yelling in their ear not to allow the car to be damaged, because it affected their grid position for the race last year and because of the budget cap and everything else, that they all just, oh no, after you go, no, and then they sort of drone around. But we'll see how it works. As I say, I think the guys on the back who've got no chance of scoring points on Sunday because they know where they've qualified will, ramrod their way through the field to try and get points in the sprint race. And it'll be behoving the guys at the front of the grid for Sunday's race to be looking seriously in their mirrors at people coming down the inside, particularly with the speed differentials they got at Baku on the straights, particularly the main straight. Hello, Peter. Hi there from Topic Quattro 4. We Love Techno Live. GP Adventures. Hello, Mary Binny. Hi, Peter. Feels like pre-season testing all over again. Yeah, it is a bit like that. Well, I don't think there'll be a lot of testing of parts, though. As I keep saying, if you're AlphaTauri and you've got a new floor and a new bit here and the car's lighter and this bit needs to be tested and they need to aero test that and put in a bit of viz flow there, flow viz. And you've got Yuki Tsunoda and Nick De Vries who want to get prepared for qualifying, which is FP2 on Friday. How much time are you going to spend on your flow viz? Not a lot, I wouldn't have thought. You'd want to get somebody like Tsunoda into a groove, wouldn't you? You wouldn't want him going cold into qualifying. Or maybe they're all going to be hopeless in qualifying and all, it'll make no difference because they'll all be in the same part of the grid anyway. I don't know. we'll see how it goes. Let's see what happens. Mate, Giorgio Harvath. Thanks for doing this. May I ask, what is your opinion of the 2016 season? Rosberg beating Hamilton and Rosberg driving style. Kind regards, Matthew. Yeah, I think Nico was just... It was the era of technology taking another big leap in terms of what they could do with simulators and all the data they were getting. And it was just massively expanding. And I think Nico was just on top of that, did that really well and just got himself very organized and very sorted and was very good at starts, very good at qualifying, stayed calm, did the job. Slightly longer corners than Lewis. I would say he was Lando Norris type driver. Very, very good. Very, very good input rates. Very self-critical. Very clear mind. But just slightly longer corners and slightly less commitment than Lewis in terms of his own self-confidence. And I'm not sure that applies to Lando. I think Lando is very self-confident. I think Nico... I mean, if there's one place you could say where Lewis would always do Nico, it would be at the top of the hill at Monaco, going into Casino Square, where they break over just after the hump, and you've got really committed there, just slightly left of centre. That's where Lewis is at his very best, and that's where Nico would always leave a slight margin compared with Lewis. Or going into the swimming pool, probably a similar place. But though there aren't many of those sorts of corners in Formula One, they're all pretty, arithmetic these days. And Formula One is, for Nico, became quite an arithmetic thing. And I think he knew how good Lewis was. And he just worked and worked and worked and worked. And did a great job back at the factory with the boys. Lewis, I think that year was a bit undisciplined with his... approach away from the track. I think there were moments when he was flying all over the world and getting to a race at the last minute. I don't know for sure, but I think that was what was going on, and I think Nico just sort of took advantage of that, not deliberately, but he could see it going on. I think when Nico, I believe he faked that moment at Monaco when he went down the escape road and brought the yellows out, and I don't think Lewis ever forgave him for that, and I think that would have changed completely the dynamic between the two. And I think that, that was Nico. I don't think Lewis would ever do anything like that, ever. But Nico is very different from his father in the way he drove. Keki, short for Kayo, was very oversteery, loved the back end of the car. That was his feel, very Jos Verstappen-ish, very Hub-Rottengatter-ish. Plucking names out of the sky, but let's say Jochen Rintisch. But Nico was more front-endy than that. Nico was very, very good and very svelte with his inputs and very organised in the car. Very good, but he couldn't keep it up, and he knew that having got that, if he won that championship, got it. Now it's a good time to stop. A bit like getting a hole in one. Yeah, what's the point of it? Playing golf again? I've got the hole in one. That's the whole point of the sport. Bit like that, wasn't it? So Pablo, I was going to look like Pablo Montoya, but isn't it Pablo Montequinos? I'm glad the sprint doesn't decide the Grand Prix grid. Yeah, I am too, obviously. 2 qualifiers in a row is absurd. Well, it's interesting. Well, it's not in a row. It's split by an evening of discontent of all the teams thinking, I want to get to that car in the Parc Fermé. I can't touch it. We need to go 2 millimeters lower with the ride height. We can't touch it. GP Adventures says, yes, you're right. Formula One was fine as it was. Andy M, big question. Will Mercedes have upgrades? What is the smart money saying? The smart money is saying that, yeah, they will have upgrades. I'm sure most teams have got upgrades which they're staging over the next 2 to 3 races. But I think Mercedes will have more upgrades than Red Bull because, as I said at the start of the show, they've got much less to lose. Because for a start, they've got 2 really good drivers that can just plug themselves in and be pretty quick out of the box going into qualifying. So, first of all, they've got 2 guys that they can afford to use for 20 minutes doing a little bit of upgrade testing. because they know they're going to be quick in qualifying. Lewis and George are going to do the job. And beyond that, they've got to throw everything they got at it because they're behind Red Bull big time, and they've got nothing to lose. Whereas Red Bull, I don't think will bring a lot to Baku in terms of new bits, because they've got a very quick car and they don't need to be complicating things when all they need to do is just make sure that Max and Perez are on the front row of both races. But Merc have got a lot more bits coming, I would think. And so, but I don't think they're going to be coming with a Red Bull shape. I think they're going to be developing this zero pod car. As I always said, when there was a big discussion towards the end of last year, would they be going for an all-new car? I always said I felt Mercedes would stick to their policy of a theme that they will continue to develop over a period of time, which is what they did with the low-rate car alongside the high-rate Red Bull car in the previous era. RC Ritter, what do they expect to change between the two sessions? Nothing, because they're going to Parc Fermé after FP1. I've got it here. I've sent an email to a race engineer friend of mine and said exactly that. We go into Parc Fermé before qualifying on Friday, and that's it. Can't touch the car after that. So whatever's the car that you're running in FP1, that is the car the setup you've got for the rest of the weekend. Technology, bring back the technology. So race quali should be on Saturday, Mind Postman says. Sprint format, absurd, Eric Dullion. Well, this is interesting because you fans are all the ones that voted into having sprints, we're constantly told, and you're all being dissatisfied with the sprint last year, and now it's all being changed to make fans happy. And look at this, everyone's saying it's absurd. Snowline says, hey everybody. Hey Snowline. Eric Lewis says, nice Hawaiian shirt, thank you very much. Bought this in, I went over to the Juan Pablo Montoya Sunrisa charity kart event in Cartagena, Colombia in 2005. And there were lots of cool IndyCar drivers there, a few F1 blokes, Juan Pablo, of course. And I bought this in Cartagena in the Quicksilver shop there. Had it a long time, still going strong. Thank you very much for the comment. RC Ritter again, practice sprint reverse order of championship points for a pass. Well, here am I saying give a point to a pole position. Nobody seems to be talking about that apart from me, only because as the season gathers pace, we do sometimes see the pole winner getting a 10-place grid penalty. And I've always felt that if you're going to have a floating point for fastest lap in the Grand Prix, which is a bit meaningless because it can be somebody coming in just for a new set of tyres, well, it always is on the last lap or 2 laps to go, why not take that point away and give that point instead to the pole sitter? Yeah, to the pole sitter. I used to say, but not over sprint weekends, but now I can say for every race because it is actually a normal qualifying so far as the Grand Prix goes. So here's the thing. If you've got a 10-place grid penalty, if you're on the pole on Friday for the Grand Prix, but you've got to change an engine and change a gearbox, whatever, and then you start with your fresh engine and gearbox on Saturday morning, do you start from the back of the grid for the sprint race as well as the other Grand Prix, or 10-place grid? Interesting point. I wonder if they've thought about that. Egon Faulkner says sprint format is all over the shop. I keep saying you're the guys that voted for it. I'm only being facetious. I'm winding you all up because you know what I think about surveys, fan surveys. Nothing wrong with fans. I'm just no. I haven't got any time for surveys. That's all. Mary Binney says hi Snow. Back to Snowline. RC Ritter 3 lap qualifying in order of championship Saturday night, Sunday race. Yeah, lots of things going on. Jerome Simmons, I think this is the first time I've ever had somebody, I may be wrong here, but I think somebody's paid to have their question in a big colour. If they have, Jerome, I'm unbelievably touched, and thank you. If you haven't, thank you anyway for asking a question. This new sprint format is really a bunch of nonsense. Already hated it, now even more. Well, the next one is from Abdullah. I hate the sprint. They're all agreeing. Why I hate... Oh, no, Prospect doesn't. Prospect says, why I hate sprints. Kahin, why do the bottom teams benefit from this? Just to risk of blowing up the budget? No, the bottom teams benefit because... so the bottom teams, what I'm talking about is if you qualify badly on Friday afternoon for the Grand Prix, which will take place on Sunday... let's say you're Yuki Tsunoda and you hit the wall on the first lap of Q1 and you're at the back of the grid, and then you've got a chance then to qualify in your rebuilt car for the sprint race on Saturday, and you qualify 10th, and you're going to be starting from the back of the grid on Sunday. What are you going to do in that sprint race? What's he going to do going into the first corner? That's the point. And I think, we'll see. They may all be very circumspect, and they may all be under orders not to touch anything and don't damage the car. But, this is Baku we're talking about. There's a lot of things to hit in Baku, and there is a massive speed differential on the straight as well, as I keep saying. So, let's watch this space. I'll be doing the usual videos on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I say the usual videos. They won't be the usual videos because I'll be talking about Grand Prix qualifying on Friday, and also I'm going to say it here, I'm going to be guesting another friend of mine. Scarbs is still 100% my best buddy, and we're doing lots of stuff in the future together, but there's another young aerodynamicist who I'm going to hopefully talk to after FP1 in Baku, who will give us a bit of a rundown on what he sees as some of the upgrades that have appeared in FP1. That video will be, I'll record that and put that out in the video which goes out after qualifying, that Friday night video. It'll be in part of that. So just to tell you about that. And he's a cool guy. He had work experience at Red Bull for 2 years in the aerodynamics department. And he's out there doing his own thing, creating some really good graphics. And he's a really good bloke. So we'll just see how that goes. So watch that space as well. Here we go. So lots of people talking about, so the midfield will push harder. We're talking about the midfield, this is Andy M, the midfield in terms of the grid, which has been defined on Friday. That's the point. Even more the case, if Carlos Sainz knows that he's starting the Grand Prix on Sunday from the back row of the grid, for whatever reason, but he qualifies 6th for the sprint race, he's going to be pretty aggressive, is he not? Why not? There's half a chance he's not even going to finish the Grand Prix if he's starting from the back, because he's going to get involved in some first corner melee. So he might as well go for it in the sprint race. That's the point. It's not the current leaders and back markers. It's whatever the grid formation is on Friday. You're going to see some guys who are going to say, well, I've got nothing to lose now. I'm just going to take out 3 cars and win the sprint race. I'm being facetious, of course. Nobody thinks that way anymore in Formula One. No. Of course you can't take out 3 cars. No. But what I'm saying is if before you might have been a little bit circumspect, those guys might be much more aggressive now, because why wouldn't they be? They're not going to be doing much on Sunday. GAP Adventure says, go back to qualifying on Friday and Saturday like it used to be. Sprint race is dumb, says Unbehavable. This is, there's a lot of, if I'm taking a percentage now, I would say 80% of you are saying that you don't like the sprint. You don't like sprints at all, and you certainly don't like the new format, even though we haven't seen it yet. So let's give it a chance. Carnivore Santa, what a name. The safest spot in the sprint race will be pole. Well, absolutely right there. Absolutely right. But you're a bit of a sitting duck with the DRS there, aren't you? Maybe. Depends who it is on the pole. If you're Fernando, on the pole, you're a sitting duck because you don't have massive top speed, and DRS comes into play, I think, lap 2, of the sprint race. Dick Beanie says, have the sprint points also changed? No, they haven't. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's first down to 8th place. So that is the incentive now. It's not qualifying. It's just getting those points. And there'll be, as I say, for Max Verstappen, in the overall spectrum of things, if he's got to take an enormous risk to finish 5th rather than 4th in the sprint race, he ain't going to take it, is he? But if it was, potentially to be on the pole for around Baku compared with P4, he might take it. That's the difference. Andy M said, back of the grid have their own race on Saturday. Big teams will stay out of trouble. Yeah, but the big teams could qualify on the back of the grid for the Grand Prix. And they might have this engine drama, gearbox thing. Who knows? So it's no longer can we just talk about the big teams or the midfield or the back of the grid, because it's actually what happens in qualifying on Friday will affect very much the mentality of the team and the driver going into the race, the sprint race, and how they do it, assuming, they have a better qualifying, which they probably will for the sprint race if they've had a problem for the Grand Prix. James Allison, we talked about James Allison. For me, he never went away, so I can't really talk about him returning. I think he was always there in the background. He's probably got a bit more emphasis, but I don't believe if James had been in the position he's in now, that Mercedes would have gone into 2021 without porpoising and with a completely different car. I think that would have been exactly the same car. That's my belief. Maybe completely wrong there, but this is my understanding. It's not more than belief. It's just my understanding of the situation, which, okay, may be wrong, but I think that is the situation. The people who I know have basically all said that to me. Nikita Bakunin, quick question. Any opinions on what AI could do to car development? It's evolving rapidly. Would you need a limit of AI workers, AI cap? Well, I actually sat next to a guy on a flight a couple of years ago. It was an AI graduate who was who used to work at Toro Rosso, and I said, "Wow, that's really cool. Presumably, you're looking at AI in Formula One." He said, "Well, no, not really. Can't really see big applications for it." So that was that, and that was a couple of years ago. I think things, as you say, probably have changed. But won't Formula One be doing all they can to limit the amount of AI that's playing its role in the design of the car or the I don't know. Maybe the operation of the race, maybe it'll come in more with that in terms of predictions and simulations and stuff. The design of the car, they're so paranoid about CFD and wind tunnel and standardized parts and materials. Are they going to want to just have AI coming in? And if AI comes in as a new way of saving money, I suppose it'll be massive, won't it? But I don't know enough about it, really, if I think about it, to know if AI could be used to save money or whether it's incredibly expensive to introduce anyway. I think the main point is that most of the Formula One people on the managerial organizational side that I know are all very aware of how important the show is and of not allowing it to become too artificial or too technical. But they love the technology, if you see what I mean. So therein lies the dilemma. Jacob says, thanks so much for doing these streams, Peter. Greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. Live here, better than Twitch. Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that. I mean, I had a lot of fun doing the Twitch stuff. It's just that over the years, I've been doing a lot of stuff on YouTube, and I feel very warm about YouTube because they've effectively given me a platform that no TV network ever gave me, and because I can just say what I think for as long as I want, and it doesn't cost an arm and a leg. It costs a bit, but not that much. And so, yeah, it seemed logical eventually to be here, but I was interested to do the Twitch thing because they've got quite a lot of drive there to do live streams as well, a bit beyond gaming. They were interested in developing it, so I was working with those guys a bit behind the scenes as well. And but yeah, great to be on YouTube. Thank you. Karma in Babylon, great name, I love it. Hi PW, what do you think happened with Kimi in 2008? Why was Massa generally faster after Manicure? Could you say a few words about Ronnie? I've read about him. I know what happened to Kimi. I'm not going to say it. You all know what happened to Kimi. He just enjoyed his life a bit, didn't he? And why not? He's a good guy, very relaxed. Big Kimi fan, always have been. But yeah, he was, I don't know, he was 0.3 slower than he was at his peak at McLaren, I think. Probably lost about that much. And good luck to him, That's the way he lived his life, and that's the way he was and is. And he's a good bloke. Ronnie was, what can I say about Ronnie? Well, I mean, I was in awe of Ronnie. I read about Ronnie when I was a kid in Formula 3 and how good he was, and I loved everything about Ronnie. I loved his helmet design, the sponsors, the look of the techno he drove in Formula 3, and then when I eventually got to meet him, he was always very polite, and he had this lovely sort of Peter Ustinov English with a Swedish accent, quite funny, but quite serious as well. I mean, I didn't talk to him about. I had a lot of racing conversations with Ronnie about the March 721X, for example, what it was like to drive, and I remember saying to him, yeah, but with your reflexes and oversteer, Ronnie, you should be able to get around all that. And he'd say, yeah, but there is a limit to what I can do, and we'd joke about that, and he was just. I did a. What year was that? That would have been about 75, I guess. I was at Autocar, and I had this idea of Ronnie driving a Formula 3 March again, because he's driving for March in Formula 1, and put the idea to him, to Zolder, I think. I said, Ronnie, what would you think about if I can organise with Robin Hurd that Bruno Giacomelli's F3 March is in the pit lane during the lunch break at Silverstone test, that you get in and do a few laps? He said, I would love to do this. Yeah, make it happen. And it did, and it happened. There was a Grand Prix driver, winning Grand Prix driver, and he was in Bruno's F3 car for my magazine story. And that's the sort of guy he was. He just loved racing. Incredibly fingertippy as a driver. No white knuckles about Ronnie. It was all very sensitive, but phenomenal car control. I remember 73. Those were the days when I had the IRPA armband, International Racing Press Association, lovely red leather armband, had your picture on it and a number, and you remember this association. If you had this armband, you could go anywhere on any racetrack in the world, within reason, if you use your brain. And anyway, it was Thursday early practice at Monaco, and I was in my favourite place at the exit of Casino Square, halfway down the hill, a little bit up from halfway point, and Ronnie in the JPS Lotus 72. It was just like you could hear it, and then he would just be on the power, and you could just see this. About lap 3, was still crud on the circuit, still very, very green track, stuff coming up, and Ronnie just coming out of coming into view like this, and just holding the slide right up to the guardrail on exit. Absolutely, I remember thinking as if it was yesterday, this is why I like motor racing. And Ronnie encapsulated all of that. When Woodcote Corner was not a chicane at Silverstone, the guy you watched there was Ronnie Peterson. In anything, he was just sideways long before the corner, just like this the whole way through. Lovely guy, and very good friends with Tim Schenken. And I think that's the side of Ronnie that I was mentioning. That he's quite a serious guy as well, and really. He worked hard at his motor racing. He listened to people like Ken Tyrrell, to Colin Chapman. He asked questions. He asked questions of Mario. He respected Mario like crazy when they were at Lotus. Yeah, of course there were moments when he was quicker than Mario. but he respected Mario and learnt from Mario, and he never stopped learning and getting better as a driver, in my view. And Tim Schenken was the ultimate sort of Nico Rosberg type driver, very technical and very organised. And I think Ronnie loved that about Tim, and he gravitated towards Tim. And he and Ronnie were a great combination when it came to pairing up for Ferrari with that beautiful 312P in 1973. And they won a lot of races. They were really great combination, Tim Schenken, Ronnie Peterson. And Tim's got this story. I don't know whether it's true or not, but knowing Tim, it probably is, because he wouldn't make things up. And Ronnie's driving back from Silverstone on the country roads there through Thame. I think it's pronounced Thame, Thame, near there, and all deserted country roads. And there's some guy, slow guy in front holding him up. And Ronnie, and it's a fairly open bit of road, and Ronnie can see this filling station garage on the left and goes through the garage forecourt like this and passes the guy going through the garage. There's a sort of chicane. Probably true. I did a lap of Silverstone with Ronnie in a Ford Granada in the wet and a Goodyear tyre test day once. And he was what you'd expect, it was all sort of one-handed, just silky smooth, opposite lock everywhere. Just basically doing this with the steering wheel long before he got to the corner, and just massive slide and looking long way ahead. And I was in the Monza car park in 1978 after qualifying. I went to see Mario, and Mario was easy to find because he had a Rolls Royce given to him by Killy Motors. It was a big mate of Frank's. They gave Rolls to quite a lot of these drivers, and Ronnie and Mario were sharing this roller, and they were staying up at Villa d'Este, so they were driving up to Villa d'Este, Lake Como, every day from Monza. And I wanted to chat to Mario about something. I don't know what it was. And I used to write preview circuit. Makes me always laugh when I get these previews from a Grand Prix and I get all these quotes from engineers, and I'm thinking, I wonder if it's like today, if it's like when it was then. And you go to an engineer and say, what are you going to say about Baku in the preview? And they say, I don't want to say anything, make it up yourself, which is what basically happened with Mario. He was supposed to do these guides to these circuits in the Mario Andretti lap. And after a while he said, Peter, just write it. You know what I'm doing. Which is a bit of a compliment, I suppose. And I was doing it. Anyway, I had to see him at Monza. So I found this roller and in the car park. And when I got there, Ronnie was in the back of the roller, the boot of the roller. The boot was up, and he was sitting in the boot with his knees under his chin, his arms around his knees. And he was just Barbara wasn't there. Deanne was there, that's right. Mario's wife was there. And I said, hi, Ronnie, how you doing? And he'd just signed for McLaren for 79. And I said, wow, congratulations, that's a brilliant thing. I hope the car's great. And he was telling me about the car and how good it was going to be, and we were chatting away. And then Mario came up, and we had a laugh, and where have you been? And, we have to go now. Mario, I show you how to drive now. All this stuff. And then he left, and he died the following day. It was, I was very lucky to have spent that time with him. He was an absolute hero and a star. Absolute star. He died of a broken leg, basically, over-anaesthetized, and when he in a Poxy hospital, local hospital, and when a fatty embolism developed in the bloodstream, his body didn't have the ability to cope, and he effectively died of a broken leg. Because I saw him on the stretcher after I was down at the first chicane, and I saw him on the stretcher going with the ambulance, and he was sitting up and looking at his leg and various other things. And then Colin Chapman was running out. I remember going up to Colin and saying, Ronnie's not in good shape. He's okay. It's not life-threatening. I've seen him on the stretcher. He's okay. But his legs don't look good. I just couldn't believe it when I heard the news the next morning. Absolutely shattered. Terrible. I'm so glad Formula One isn't like that anymore. Almost makes me cry, actually, if I think about it. I've got to stop this. Move on. Right. Cosmos Trek Peter, when will Formula One cancel? I look at my watch, 2 hours. I'm going to have to go. Got to do some stuff with family. What do you think? Here we are. Sorry, Cosmos Trek. Peter, when will Formula One cancel DRS so there can be the first real passes since DRS is introduced? Well, I was hoping, Cosmos, it was going to be when they brought in the 22 regs, which supposedly made it easier to follow the car in front and to promote overtaking. And I remember saying then, it's a great, good opportunity to ban DRS. I said it publicly and I said it to my mates at Liberty and the FIA, and everybody said, yeah, we're going to look at it. And now, of course, what's happened in 23, they've done modifications to those 22 rules, and it's now more difficult to follow the car in front. So now they're all saying, oh, yeah, we need DRS now. So, to me, that DRS zone at Baku is actually dangerous. I don't mind getting on saying that publicly. I think it's a dangerous place to have DRS. I think the speed differential there at that speed on that length of straight is too much. Egon Faulkner, Bandini and Rindt. Yeah, Lorenzo got better and better. I mean, Lorenzo to me was sort of, Mike Spence got really good towards the end of his career as well. And I think they were pretty similar in terms of pace and talent. Rindt, I think, was better than both of them. I mean, Rindt was seriously good. He was, as quick as Jackie, if not quicker. Maybe not as consistent, not as able to, in a Lewis-like way, not as able to do what Jackie could do and massage the car through all the different variables, but seriously quick racing driver as well. Although, you say that, and there's John Surtees, first drive for Cooper, 66 French Grand Prix, and he out-qualifies Jochen Rindt, who's been driving for Cooper since 1965. John Surtees, brilliant. Is med soft how... Oh, sorry, it's medium soft, how all the teams have to run in the sprint race qualifying. Yes, it is. One set of medium, and then one set of soft in the sprint qualifying. And it's a shorter qualifying as a result. So everybody only has one run. Well, one run. Because there isn't time for two, and obviously at Baku with stuff going on, red flags, all that, everyone's going to be trying to do a time early on, I would guess. And if you don't get a time early on, maybe there will be some left in the tyre. Maybe. I don't know. It's earlier this year than it was, isn't it? It's not quite going to be quite as hot. And here's the other thing. Bearing in mind they're shortening the qualifying for the sprint race, and it's, pretty nip and tuck about getting a time in. Remember what I was bellyaching about after the Australian Grand Prix with Formula 2 qualifying, when a red came out with 3 minutes 52 seconds to go, and actually there would have just been time to have done a time lap, and they just said no, end of qualifying. They need to be really careful about that at Baku, if that situation arises, about what they're going to do. If there's only 1 minute to go and there's a red flag and some super quick guy hasn't got a time in, what are they going to do? Are they going to say, oh no, that's it, because it's only a 45-minute session, we haven't got time to faff around? What, to me, as I said after Australia, when you F2 should take precedence over Porsche Super Cup, and if they're that worried about the timetable, take a couple of minutes out of Porsche Super Cup and give it to F2 so that they have another 5 minutes and everybody can go out and do their proper run. No, half the grid didn't do a second run in Formula 2 qualifying, and that could well happen in Baku. And I think they need to be absolutely, totally sure of what they're going to do, and what is the cutoff at which they won't restart one of the divisions of sprint qualifying if there's a red. Could well happen. Rob De Vries. Any relation to Nick, I wonder? I think they're in risk of losing interest for the whole of Saturday. Well, there's a big thing. It's supposed to be the opposite. Everyone's supposed to be thinking, isn't this brilliant? They've all been sitting now at the FIA deciding this new format. The fans have been consulted. They're doing this for the fans. 90%, that's going up to 90% now. I think it was 80. It's 90% of the fans, probably 100%, seem to think it's ludicrous. Oh, hang on. RC Ritter says, nothing wrong with DRS, rather remove the wings and raise the ride height. Okay, all right, point taken. Yeah. I thought you were going to say nothing wrong with DRS. I want more overtaking or something. But no, you make a very good point. I mean, I've always said that. As did Chris Amon, the great Chris Amon. You know, get rid of the wings. Which Formula One team needed the break most? Unbehavable. Needed past tense? Or do you mean needs present tense, the current lot? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Needs a break most. If you mean of the current teams, which team needs a break? I mean, maybe Williams. I think Williams will go quite well, assuming the guys stay out of trouble. I think it's quite a big ask for Logan around there, isn't it? Or not, maybe. But Alex should go pretty well around there by now. And I think their car, which is mega quick in a straight line, should be quite good around Baku. So let's see what they do. Lots of haze going on here. High five, man. Meinl Karim Bahim heard that they got an offer for 800 mil, which they rejected. We're talking about Toro Rosso now, AlphaTauri. Well, yeah, that shows you how much Formula One teams are worth now. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Going postal, pointless changes by people who are not fans of Formula One or its history. Well, I think, I'm not saying that. You're saying that. I think most of the people running Formula One today would count themselves as fans, wouldn't they? They may not be fans of its history, but I have to say, in the time, 2 years now, I've been doing the Global F1 exhibition, and the amount of history into which we delved with the number of key Formula One people, all of them showed a complete fascination of history and interest in it. And everybody was keen on bringing its history out in such a way that the young Netflix viewer begins to appreciate how much heritage there is. So I'd like to think that you're wrong there. You may be right that Diego Moreno again, bring back Friday and Saturday combined qualifying. Well, yeah, that would be good, wouldn't it? Every lap you do counts for qualifying. Let's start on a Wednesday and drone around for 5 hours. In the old days, everyone falls asleep. Mega. No, but I take your point. You know, it's Friday, Saturday combined. I mean, you got the whole problem with the wet. You mean combined actually doing average times or something? I don't know. But I was trying to think what the implications of the wet would be if we had a wet qualifying. I suppose it wouldn't really matter, would it? I mean, what happens if they go out on inters in sprint qualifying when it's medium, soft? They go out on inters and the track gets drier, but there's not enough time to come in. I mean, that's another scenario, isn't it? Here's another one. Ritter says, I really wish they'd go back to much smaller, lighter cars, 500 kilos, 1 litre ice with KERS. Yeah, internal combustion engine with KERS. What? Yeah, you know, but I don't know. They want to try and make them smaller and lighter, the cars, don't they? Whether they'll succeed, another question. I doubt they will because the cars at the moment are getting bigger and heavier all the time because of safety things and other things, cameras and all sorts of stuff. Yeah. What does it say about Leclerc's perceived talent if he gets beaten by Sainz? 2 out of 3 seasons? Seasons? And what would it say? Well, he hasn't got beaten by Sainz over the season. Sainz out-qualified him in Melbourne. I'll give you that. I'd say that's the first time that's ever really happened in a straight fight. So right now, I think it says quite a lot about Sainz gaining confidence in his own ability and putting the lap together and racing well. He raced well. He beat him in the race too. But then he maybe has lost all that confidence as a result of that penalty drama. I don't think there's any. I think Leclerc's got to come back in Baku. He's got to be Charles Leclerc in Baku again. He wasn't Charles Leclerc in Melbourne at all. So we got to look for that Charles in Baku. LB, I don't think Mercedes will ever win a race this year. Wow. Toto, what do you think about that? No, I don't think he's right. I mean, it's easy for people to say this, but, we are working very hard. Yeah, but so are Red Bull. Yeah, but we are working very hard. Yeah, but so are Red Bull and Ferrari and Aston Martin. Yeah, but so are we. And so it goes on. Everybody's working very hard. 427-2005. It's not a phone number. It's the name of our next comment. McLaren is consistently poor. ? Yeah, it is, isn't it? There's another team that says we're heading in the right direction and we're looking for a good result in Baku. Doesn't say we've been really bad and we think these are the reasons. They may not be the reasons, but we think these are. Just says we're heading in the right direction. Sebastian Vettel says everybody is a Ferrari fan. Yeah, I think he said that, didn't he, when he went to Ferrari? Not sure he was when he left Ferrari, but anyway. Sterling Moss, Juan Manuel Fangio, yeah, great names, great drivers. Felipe Barreto, hi Peter, a little off topic. I love these off topic things. The Madrid exhibition was amazing. Thank you. I was there yesterday. I'm from Lisbon, Portugal. My congratulations. Are you thinking of releasing an official book in the future? Yes, we are. We're thinking of it. We nearly did a book around the current exhibition, but things got a little bit away from us. So yeah, we are. And we're thinking, obviously, the exhibition we're planning at the moment to a lot of different venues. There's a lot going on. And, a lot of credit to all the people involved, me, not me, on the logistics side and the content side. It's been so much fun working with them. And I don't know if those of you who've been, one thing I haven't talked about very much is the 3D model that Chris Beattie created for us, which is really good, of a current car. It's as good a 3D model of a current car as I've ever seen, and you got to have a look at that. In fact, I think you might even see it on Formula One TV these days, soon, maybe, I don't know. Chris Beattie, top man, very good 3D modeler, very good. And it's been, I think there are, we've had all the problems we've had, not problems, there have been a couple of things that haven't been absolutely right, and they've all been due to long waits and all the good things, if you like, which hopefully we've rectified now. And now looking ahead to what we're doing, how we're developing the exhibition and where we're going to be going with it. So lots of really exciting things coming up. But thank you for your comments. It's been brilliant working on it and with all the people with whom I've had the privilege to work as well. Cosmos Trek says Ferrari have no clue what they're doing. They had the whole year and off-season to fix the car and engine. They just came back with the same problems. What do you think of that, Freddie? Yeah, but it's different now in I will change everything. Yeah. I think that's what Charles is probably saying right now to himself every night when he goes to bed. Only if Max and Checo both DNF. But this is sort of interchange between you all. What car uses the most anti-dive and squat after the Red Bull? The Aston and the third? I have absolutely no idea, Andres. Very good question. Sort of thing I'm going to need to ask Scarbs. Watch this space. Ask this again. I'll ask Scarbs what he thinks about that. I don't know. How would you know that? So little suspension movement anyway, isn't there? I wonder why Williams, this is from C. I wonder why Williams and McLaren don't get as much criticism as Ferrari, even though they are the second and third most successful teams in Formula One. Well, it depends who's giving this criticism and where you're reading it. I mean, so far as my channel is concerned and my input and my content, I think I'm quite positive about Ferrari most of the time. I do think that they should have hired Adrian Newey 5 years ago, but that's, by the by. I have been quite critical of Williams and McLaren, actually. I was pretty critical of McLaren in the last live stream, I think. Went through Zach's list of things, leaving Honda engines and spending 25 mil to go to Merck. Not much wrong with the Honda engine. Replacing Daniel Ricciardo and a few other things. So I've been pretty critical of McLaren, but I've still got a lot of love for McLaren. And Williams, Williams, I don't know what to say about Williams, really. I know what the Williams team was that I worked for and loved for many years. And I don't really get the same vibe anymore, but equally they seem to have a half reasonable car. Cosmos, Peter, does Mercedes bring back Allison mean the replacement personnel ideas were a total failure? No, I think, as I keep saying, to me, I don't think, I think if James Allison had not moved at all into whatever department he went for a while, I don't think the car would be any different last year. I don't think it would have been any different than the car we saw. I can't imagine it wouldn't have had his stamp on it. So that's all I can say. And now, there's obviously Egon Faulkner keeps mentioning these great drivers, Jim Clark, Graham Hill. Yeah, mega. Andrew Storm, because they don't have the budgets that Ferrari has. Oh, that's by Williams and McLaren. Well, yeah, but with the budget cap thing, you imagine they're all running, not Williams maybe, but McLaren would be running pretty near the limit, wouldn't they? LV, any idea which team James Key will go to? Well, I've said, if I was Freddie, I would definitely look at him at Ferrari. That's what I've said, but I have no idea who else might be looking at him. So I don't know. There's a bit of a Stephen replying to Cosmos here. Hatman F1. Good evening, Peter, from sunny Ireland. How are they? Top of the morning to you. With the announcement today, what are your thoughts of Franz Tost stepping down from AlphaTauri with Laurent Mekies? Well, I think Franz, he's just been at it a long time, I think he probably, knowing Franz, he probably initiated it and thinks, I saw Franz on the flight back from Melbourne, actually. He looked like, had enough of these queues, enough of these backpacks, enough of this, drama. Need to relax a little bit. Not that Franz has ever wanted to relax. I was just have a funny conversation with Franz because he's the last bloke in the world, a bit like Frank Williams, actually. The thing he hated most was having to do nothing over a holiday and, spend Christmas with the family or whatever. So I'd go up to him. First time I'd see him at the first race, I'd say, "Hey, Franz, you have a great Christmas? How was it? Did you have the family over?" Yeah, it was horrendous. I had to get out of it. Brilliant. I love Franz. And anyway, I can't imagine he's been pushed. I think, he's just decided enough's enough. And he's still going to be a consultant, Franz. So it's a good life for him. He doesn't have to do all the travel and he can still hang around, do what he wants. That's that. And I don't know much about Laurent Mekies, to be honest. I have no idea he was sporting director stroke assistant team principal at Ferrari. As I said, I think the more significant thing is that he's left Ferrari, not that he's the guy at AlphaTauri. And that maybe is a pointer towards Freddie Vasseur deciding who he wants with him and who he doesn't. I may be reading more into that, but that's how I read. That's what I'm reading into it at the moment. Ferrari sees it. Ferrari have won races in the past. McLaren, it's just this weird McLaren, Ferrari, Williams thing. Yao, really looking forward to the new format. Not sure how many people are. Max is going to win the championship anyway, so let's mix it up and see what works. Well, I'm not sure Max would agree with that. He would say, yeah, but, the last thing I need is Yuki Tsunoda taking off my front wing end plate or whatever. But, no offense there, Yuki, but, these things happen on street circuits. And, Max wants if he's the quickest guy in the quickest car, he wants to be on the pole and win the race at the slowest possible speed, doesn't he? And all this stuff is there to mess it all up. So there we go. I don't know. I'm going to have to wind it up now, guys. I feel terrible because there's always more questions and there's a lot more I haven't got through. But I've been on air for 2.5 hours. Haven't had dinner yet. And equally, I need to... I'm going to read a chapter of a book to my son, Jack, this evening, because Jack's really into the night sky. And I'm going to read a chapter from James A. Michener's novel, Space, in which he's capturing the early years of one of his characters who looks up into the night sky and starts to identify all the planets and the stars in a logical way. And I'm going to read that chapter to Jack tonight because I think he'll enjoy it. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm probably going to have to... Zale here, it's right at the end. Hey, Peter. Oh, no, there's more questions. Shouldn't do it. He's talking about geographical itinerary. Yeah, after Baku, back to back to, you'd think maybe, I don't know, Hungary, some place that's fairly near Baku. No. Miami. Those poor guys. Imagine the pack up on the Sunday night. The logistics. It'll all happen though, magically. That is the magic of Formula One. So thank you everybody for your comments, questions. I've had a lot of fun. I hope you have too. Now it's time for me to see if I can do this mega. Last time I cut the ending off, I think, didn't I? I stopped it too early. So, because there's a bit of a delay between what I see in the camera and what I see on my editing platform. So this time I'm going to not cut it off, but I am going to go to the ending now. But I'll see you all again over the weekend doing my videos, and then we'll do some more live streams. Might be a bit frenetic between the two races, probably after Miami, I think. But anyway, we'll see. Thanks very much. Stay safe. Take care.